Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. Today we are going to embark on a nice new short series titled Sagas in Minutes. I decided to make the series because I get an awful lot of comments on this channel from people wanting to get into One Piece, but who simply cannot afford to spend the time reading over 900 chapters or watching almost that many episodes. And if you're watching this video in the near future, both of those numbers may be well over 1,000, so yes, it's an intimidating prospect. Therefore, the aim of this series is going to be to condense the mammoth story of the past 2 decades into a handful of short digestible videos that will be giving you all of the essential knowledge to jump into the wonderful world of One Piece. And in order to do that, we will not simply be examining arcs, but entire sagas at a time. I should warn everyone in advance that these videos are not a substitute for reading or watching the series. They simply aim to give you the tools needed to delve into the series at your leisure without feeling so overwhelmed. And with that in mind, we're going to begin with the truly classical era of One Piece as we take a journey through the East Blue Saga. East Blue is the first saga of the series, comprising 6 individual arcs told over a total of exactly 100 manga chapters and 54 anime episodes. And we begin with the premise for the entire series, as we see the execution of Pirate King Gol D. Roger. His final words to the world are a challenge, stating that he has left all of his treasure in one place, but in order to find it, you'll have to search the entire world. This treasure becomes known as the One Piece, and following Roger's execution, civilization is set ablaze with ambition to find it, commencing the Great Age of Piracy. 12 years later, we meet our young protagonist, Monkey D. Luffy, who lives in Fuchsia Village in East Blue. His desire in life is to become a pirate and join the crew of Redhead Shanks, a captain who has made Fuchsia Village his temporary base. During this time, Luffy accidentally consumes a devil fruit known as the Gomu Gomu no Mi, which turns him into a rubber man. However, he does unfortunately lose the ability to swim as a result, which is the curse of consuming devil fruits. Luffy proceeds to cause trouble with some bandits and is saved by Shanks, who loses his left arm protecting Luffy from a Sea King. As Shanks and his crew prepare to depart the village, Luffy exclaims that he will become a pirate on his own. But not only that, he also claims that he will surpass Shanks and become the next Pirate King. Touched by Luffy's word, Shanks then gives Luffy his straw hat and makes him promise to return it once he becomes a great pirate. And 10 years later, Luffy is ready to set out on his voyage, punching the Sea King that stole Shanks' arm and beginning a legendary journey. As part of his quest, Luffy decides that he will need a crew and sets out to find strong individuals, saving a chore boy by the name of Kobe from a rather large pirate named Alvida, who in turn guides him to Shellstown to meet the bounty hunter Roronoa Zoro, who is currently imprisoned on a wood thing. As it turns out, Zoro is a swordsman whose dream is to become the world's greatest swordsman, an ambition that he will achieve at almost any cost in honor of his friend and rival Kuina, who tragically passed away before she could embark on the quest herself. In a very sneaky move, Luffy retrieves Zoro's swords but tells him that he can only have them back if he joins his crew, and Zoro, being a fairly simple man, eventually acquiesces, and the pair go on to defeat Captain Morgan, a corrupt marine officer in charge of Shellstown. Basically, he's a dick. As well as his son, Helmeppo, who very much takes after his father in the whole dick department. And so the two of them proceed to leave Shellstown, although Kobe decides to stay behind and join the Marines, putting into action his own dream of becoming an officer within the organization. Take note of this little boy, you will see him again. From here, Luffy and Zoro end up in Orangetown, where they encounter a thief named Nami and a pirate called Buggy the Clown, another devil fruit user who ate the Bara no Mi, which allows him to separate and control parts of his body. As it happens, Buggy was also a member of the Roger Pirates, along with Luffy's role model Shanks, although they both held very minor positions in the crew. And so Luffy, Zoro, and Nami team up to save Orangetown, with Zoro defeating a unicyclist and Luffy blasting various parts of Buggy into the distance. After these events, Nami decides to make a temporary alliance with Luffy and Zoro, leading the 3 of them to sail to Syrup Village, where they meet a boy named Usopp and uncover a plot by the devious Kuro, captain of the Black Cat Pirates, who was planning to sack the village and steal the fortunes of a girl named Kaya. Usopp tries to warn the villagers about the impending attack, however he is a renowned liar, I mean just look at the size of that nose, and so it is put onto our small banded protagonist to stop the Black Cat Pirates, an effort that is rather successful, leaving Kuro and his crew utterly defeated. As a reward for their actions, the Straw Hats are gifted a caravel called the Going Merry, which would go on to become their flagship vessel for the foreseeable future. Furthermore, Usopp was invited to join the crew, with his dream being to become a brave warrior of the sea, just like his father Yasopp, who was actually a member of the Redhead Pirates, and Luffy met him when he was younger. Now all of this work has made our protagonist hungry, so we're off to the floating restaurant of Baratie to meet a chef named Sanji, a man whose dream is to find the legendary All Blue, a patch of water in which all of the world's various fish can be found. Now the restaurant is actually run by an ex-pirate named Zeph, who saved Sanji from a shipwreck as a child, and the two ended up marooned on a rocky outcrop. In an act of pure nobility, Zeph gave Sanji all of the food that washed up with them, and in order to survive, he severed his leg with a rock and ate it. And yes, this is the way it it happened. If you think Zeph lost his leg by saving Sanji in the ocean, then you really need to go ahead and read the manga. But the two were eventually rescued, and so Zeph started the restaurant. And as a result of nearly starving to death, Sanji decided that he would always feed a hungry person, whether they be friend or foe. Cut to the pirate Gin arriving on the restaurant and very aggressively demanding food. So as a result, Sanji fed him, and Gin went off to bring his captain Don Krieg to the restaurant, who further demanded the same thing for his entire armada. To which the owner Zeph met their request and then warned the chefs of Baratie to prepare for battle with the Krieg pirates. However, before the festivities begin, the restaurant is approached by Dracul Mihawk, one of the 7 warlords of the sea and the man responsible for destroying Krieg's armada in the Grand Line. He also happens to be the world's greatest swordsman, and so seeing an opportunity to make his dream come true, Zoro immediately challenges him. And this fight is quite possibly one of the most one-sided conflicts in all of media. Mihawk obliterates Zoro with ease. However, he is highly impressed by the young swordsman's pride and resolve, electing to leave him alive and setting Zoro a challenge to surpass him. And Zoro responds by exclaiming to Luffy that he will never lose again. In the meantime, Nami, being a thief and all, betrayed the Straw Hats and stole the Going Merry as well as all of the treasure aboard. This prompted Usopp and Zoro to pursue her, whilst Luffy stayed on Baratie to help defend the restaurant against Krieg. And one relatively hard-fought battle later, Luffy emerged victorious. And not only that, but he also acquired a new crew member in Sanji, who after much prompting agreed to become Luffy's chef. And so the Straw Hats would all converge again on Cocoyasi village, Nami's hometown, a territory currently under the rule of a fisherman named Arlong, who was responsible for killing Nami's adoptive mother Belmare and forced Nami herself into a life of piracy, agreeing to release Cocoyasi village for the sum of 100 million berries, an amount that Nami was astonishingly close to attaining. However, she was betrayed by Arlong, and more desperate than ever before, she pleaded for Luffy to help her. And of course, Luffy instantly agreed, and along with Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp, he went to Arlong Park to put an end to the fisherman's tyranny. And the ensuing battle very much acts as the climax of East Blue, with Zoro reaffirming his dream to become the world's greatest swordsman, Sanji having his first fight as a member of the Straw Hats, and Usopp overcoming his crippling cowardice and managing to defeat his first one-on-one opponent in the series. Meanwhile, Luffy destroys Arlong Park, symbolically releasing Nami from her shackles, as well as somewhat literally doing it by defeating Arlong himself. Nami then officially joins the crew as the navigator, and our team is set to embark into the Grand Line, but not before a short stop at Loguetown, the location in which the previous pirate king Roger was born, as well as the location that he was executed. And this portion of the story acts as an epilogue to East Blue, bringing back former villains like Buggy the Clown and Alvida, as well as seeing Shanks again for the first time since the initial chapter of the series. Furthermore, as a result of Luffy's actions to this point, he is officially recognized as a danger by the Marines, and a bounty of 30 million berries is placed on his head, which is incredibly high for an East Blue pirate. Loguetown also acts as a prologue to the future of the series, introducing us to one of the more fearsome Marines of the world, Smoker, who makes it his mission to pursue Luffy into the Grand Line. However, we also receive another taste of top tier power with an appearance from the most wanted man in the world, Dragon, who for mysterious reasons appears to save Luffy from execution, and with that, the Straw Hats officially embark on their journey into the Grand Line, properly commencing a spectacular adventure to achieve all of their dreams and bringing an end to the East Blue saga. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically sagas in minutes, the series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today we're going to be delving into some more classic era One Piece and start our exploration of the Grand Line with the Alabasta saga. The Alabasta saga is the second in the series, consisting of 5 individual arcs told over a mighty 117 chapters and a giggity 69 anime episodes. And we begin with the Straw Hats embarking on their adventure into the Grand Line. However, to enter this stretch of water, one must travel over the exceptionally dangerous Reverse Mountain. Although through a good old bout of teamwork, they manage to cross the mountain, enter the Grand Line, and the very first thing they see is a giant whale. The whale's name is the Boon, and Luffy ends up curing him of his depression somewhat, as well as graffitis a poorly drawn straw hat upon him. The crew also discover an old doctor named Crocus, who informs them of exactly how to travel the Grand Line, as well as states that the final island is Raft Tel, an island in which only the crew of the former Pirate King has ever reached, and it is assumed that this is where the One Piece is hidden. During this time, there's also some tomfoolery with some mysterious antagonists known as Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday, who were trying to kill the Boon so that they could feed his juicy whale meat to their hometown. Things do not go well for them, but eventually the two beg the Straw Hats to take them to an island named Whiskey Peak, to which Luffy surprisingly agrees. And as the group leave Reverse Mountain, we linger on Crocus for a bit, who reveals that he once knew the former Pirate King and ponders over whether the Straw Hats are the pirate crew that they've been waiting for. Upon arrival in Whiskey Peak, the crew are greeted as heroes and even treated to a soiree of sorts. However, this was but a clever ruse, and it is revealed that the entire island was populated by agents of an underground organization named Baroque Works, who were planning to capture Luffy and turn him into the world government to claim his 30 million berry bounty. Unfortunately for them, and very impressively, despite having won drinking contests against 13 individual people that night, Zoro manages to stay alert and proceeds to take out the entire town of roughly 100 bounty hunters. Nobody is capable of stopping him whatsoever, not even the higher ranking Baroque Works agents. However, eventually Luffy wakes up and, misunderstanding the situation, begins a fight with Zoro. In the meantime, two officer agents arrive on the island known as Mr. Five and Miss Valentine, who are in search of a spy within their organization, although they find themselves in the way of the fight between Luffy and Zoro and end up being beaten exceedingly quickly. After witnessing such strength, the choice is made to reveal the true identity of Miss Wednesday, who is actually Princess Vivi of the Alabasta Kingdom. What do you know? And it is then explained that the leader of Baroque Works, Sir Crocodile, who is also one of the 7 warlords of the sea, has been working to plunge Alabasta into civil war for his own nefarious purposes, and Vivi infiltrated his organization to find a way to fight him. The Straw Hats agree to help Vivi save her nation. However, just prior to their departure from the island, they encounter Miss All Sunday, the vice president of Baroque Works, who attempts to help the crew, but Luffy refuses. And so we set sail, with the next stop of the log post being an island known as Little Garden, a piece of land populated by dinosaurs, 2 giants, and wouldn't you know it, several more Baroque Works agents. In regards to the giants though, their names are Dory and Broggy, and they have been locked in a never-ending duel for the past century, long enough that they have both forgotten what they're fighting over. But hey, that is not going to stop 2 citizens of Elbaf doing their thing. The 2 of them are also former infamous pirate captains with a 100 million berry bounty on their heads each, and so the officer agent Mr. 3 comes up with a cunning plan to interrupt the fight and collect the bounty. Unlike prior agents, Mr. 3 and his partner Miss Golden Week present a proper challenge to the Straw Hats, with Mr. 3 managing to imprison Zoro, Nami, and Vivi on a wax wedding cake candelabra thing crafted from his devil fruit abilities, while Miss Golden Week subdued Luffy purely through the power of painting. And so it is left to Usopp and Vivi's pet duck Karoo to save the day as they manage to free everyone and together take down the officer agents. As thanks for their actions, Dory and Broggy help the Straw Hats depart the island by sending them through a giant fishy known as the Island Eater. And it is revealed to us that the reason why they began fighting in the first place was because one day Dory and Broggy could not decide whose fish was bigger, and so they entered a contest of honor to settle the feud, a contest that to this day has still not come to a conclusion. But with that out of the way, it's now on to Alabasta, right? Wrong. Whilst on Little Garden, Nami caught a deadly fever, and so the Straw Hats have to put their mission on hold to find a doctor, which leads them to Drum Island, a bit of a wintry wasteland that had recently been sacked by a pirate known as Blackbeard, causing its former king Walpole to flee in fear. Now Walpole is a bit of a dick, and so he happened to take all of the island's best doctors with him, well, all except for one, that is, a person referred to as a witch by the townsfolk, Dr. Kureha. Unfortunately, Kureha took up residence in Drum Castle after Walpole fled, and so it is put upon Luffy to carry both Nami and an injured Sanji all the way up the highest mountain of the island, barehanded by the way, to which Luffy barely makes it to the top, and the 3 are taken in for medical treatment by Dr. Kureha and her assistant, a reindeer called Tony Chopper. Well, he's half reindeer anyway. Chopper was originally a reindeer, however at a certain point in his life he stumbled across the Hito no Mi, and upon consuming it he gained a human level of sentience, as well as the ability to transform into a human and a half-human, half-reindeer form. Following this, he was exiled from his herd and labeled a monster by the human residents of the island, and only found solace in one person, his mentor, Dr. Hirolook. However, various tragedies struck and Hirolook took his own life in front of Drum Castle, prompting Chopper to beg Kureha to train him and sparking his dream to become a great doctor and cure all disease. Shortly after the Straw Hats arrived, the former king Walpole returned to the island to reclaim his throne, but remember, he's a bit of a dick, and so he was promptly defeated by Luffy and Chopper himself would go on to join the crew in order to travel the world to broaden his medical knowledge and make his dream come true. And now we arrive at the main event as the Straw Hats finally enter the desert nation of Alabasta. Just prior to their arrival, they encounter Bon Clay, an agent of Baroque Works, but they don't know that, and he doesn't know that they are prime targets of his organization. As such, they become friends instantly, and he displays his devil fruit power, which allows him to change his body into the form of anybody whom he has touched. One of the forms Bon Clay demonstrates is Vivi's father, Nefertari Cobra, which tips Vivi off to the fact that he is indeed a Baroque Works agent, and after the 2 groups depart, the Straw Hats come up with the idea to draw an X on their left arms to prove that they are all crewmates, so as to not be fooled by Bon Clay pretending to be any of them in the future. As the Straw Hats land on Alabasta and make their way across the island, they encounter Smoker, the marine captain they met in Loguetown, as well as Luffy's brother, Pork Ass T Ace, who saves them from Smoker and gives Luffy a piece of his Vivia card before continuing on his own personal mission to find a pirate by the name of Blackbeard. Deciding to face Crocodile head on, the crew makes for Rain Base and ends up captured in the basement of a casino named Rain Dinners, along with Smoker, who is pursuing them. Although they do manage to escape thanks to Sanji and his banana wani kicking abilities, and and as thanks for saving his life, Smoker decides not to pursue the Straw Hats, who, having failed to defeat Crocodile, now desperately head for the capital city of Alabasta to stop the civil war before it begins. Although Crocodile doesn't simply let them escape, and Luffy makes the decision to stay behind and face him alone in order to allow the others to proceed. Up against the wall, Luffy is entirely outclassed due to Crocodile's devil fruit abilities, a Logia type fruit that allows him to control and become sand. And after being impaled, Luffy is left for dead in the desert, although luckily he is saved by the enigmatic Miss All Sunday. Elsewhere, Vivi and the Straw Hats are unsuccessful in preventing the war from beginning, and the city becomes engulfed in battle, during which the Straw Hats each face off against a high-ranking agent of Baroque works, with the battles looking a little something like this. Nami takes on her first one-on-one opponent, Usopp teams up with Chopper to take down an officer-agent duo, Sanji defeats an Okama, and Zoro learns how to cut steel on the fly in order to come out on top against the infamous assassin, Das Bones. Meanwhile, Princess Vivi makes it all the way to the palace, confronting Crocodile, and is saved by Luffy just before he kills her. And so Luffy vs. Crocodile, round 2, begins. The difference this time is that Luffy knows Crocodile's weakness being water, and so the fight is not anywhere near as one-sided, but Crocodile still manages to defeat Luffy a second time. Shortly after, it is revealed that Crocodile's goal in Alabasta was to reach a poneglyph, which are indestructible stones inscribed with an ancient language. In this case, the poneglyph located on Alabasta was said to detail the location of the ancient weapon Pluton. Miss All Sunday, who was hired by Crocodile because she can read this language, refuses to tell Crocodile what is truly written, prompting Crocodile to attempt to murder her, resolving that he will raise the entire kingdom until he finds the weapon. At this point, Luffy catches up to him, and the two begin their third and final bout. By using his own blood as a water source, Luffy is able to strike Crocodile in a desperate battle and gains the upper hand, despite being poisoned by the Warlord's hook. And finally, in a moment of stunning resolve, Luffy exclaims that he will become the Pirate King and surpass Crocodile, kicking him into the air and punching him through solid bedrock with a barrage of strikes, leaving Crocodile defeated and the Kingdom of Alabasta saved. After exposing Crocodile, the civil war ends immediately, and Crocodile himself is arrested by Tashigi, a subordinate of Captain Smoker. As a result of their actions, Zoro is deemed a threat by the world government and is assigned a bounty of 60 million berries, while Luffy, having defeated one of the 7 warlords, has his bounty increased to a mighty 100 million berries. As the Straw Hats prepare to leave the island, they invite Vivi and Karoo to become permanent members of the crew. However, Vivi makes the tough decision to sacrifice her dreams of adventure in favor of doing something that she is even more passionate about, which is leading her kingdom. And during their goodbyes, Vivi asks them one simple question, being that if they ever meet again, would they still consider her their shipmate? To which the Straw Hats simply raise their left arms in solidarity, confirming that Vivi and Karoo will forever be members of the Straw Hat Pirates, and proceed to set sail on their next grand adventure. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically, Sagas in Minutes, the series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today, we'll be going on an adventure into the great unknown of the heavens in order to defeat a god as we break down the Sky Island Saga. Sky Island is the third saga in the series, consisting of a mere 2 arcs, told over 85 chapters and 52 episodes. It picks up immediately after the events of Alabasta, which saw the Straw Hats leave their friend Nefertari Vivi behind. However, in a bit of a twist, Miss All Sunday, real name Nico Robin, appears aboard the Straw Hat ship having stowed away, and makes an outrageous demand to Luffy that she join the crew. Robin's reasoning for this is that she was saved against her wishes on Alabasta, and so her newfound life is now Luffy's responsibility. And even more surprisingly, Luffy immediately accepts his demand. As it turns out, Robin has a dream as well to find the Rio Poneglyph and discover the true history of the world. And despite being a former antagonist, Robin gradually wins over the Straw Hats one by one and settles into the role of crew archaeologist. Very handy because at this point a gigantic ship falls from the sky, and Robin explains that their log pose has now been captured by the magnetic field of a sky island. Of course, the idea of such a location excites Luffy to no end, and so their next adventure is set. The only problem is how to get up there. This leads Luffy and the Straw Hats to land on the island of Jaya, where they meet a man by the name of Mont Blanc Cricket, an ancestor of Mont Blanc Noland, a famous figure of North Blue known in the modern day as Elia Noland. Cricket had been living on Jaya for years now, searching for the city of gold that his ancestor claimed existed. And as it so happens, Noland also spoke of Sky Islands. So Cricket informed them of the only way he knew how to reach one, which is by riding the extraordinarily dangerous burst of water known as the Knock-Up Stream. Meanwhile, on Greater Jaya, we have a couple of other factions at play. The first of which is the Bellamy Pirates, led by Bellamy the Hyena, a man with a bounty of 55 million berries. However, after beating up Cricket and stealing his gold, Luffy confronts him directly and defeats the cynical Hyena with but a single punch. At the same time, a mysterious man who enjoys cherry pies makes his presence known on Jaya, and after learning of Luffy's bounty decides to pursue the Straw Hats. Luckily, the Straw Hats manage to escape this man and his crew by riding the knock-up stream and embarking on their adventure into the sky. It is then revealed that their pursuers were the Blackbeard pirates, who quite notably were the crew who sacked Chopper's home of Drum Island, as well as being the group sought after by Luffy's brother Ace. And should the Straw Hats have been caught by them, it would have almost certainly ended in their complete defeat, if not demise. Elsewhere in the world, Luffy's defeat of Sir Crocodile on Alabasta has caused some incredibly big waves, as a meeting is convened at the Holy Land of Marijois in order to decide who will replace Crocodile as one of the 7 warlords of the sea. This meeting was called by the Gorosei, also known as the 5 Elder Stars, who are the ruling faction of the world government. However, heading up this meeting is the Fleet Admiral of the Marine, Sengoku, and 3 other warlords of the sea are present, including the world's greatest swordsman, Draco Mihawk, as well as 2 new figures in Bartholomew Kuma and Don Quixote Doflamingo, both of whom are presented as wildly powerful figures with bounties of 296 million and 340 million respectively. The meeting is intruded upon, however, by an enigmatic figure who is identified as Lafitte, a banished sheriff from West Blue known for his brutality, who has come to suggest a candidate for the warlord position. Elsewhere in the Grand Line, we are also introduced to the strongest man in the world, Edward Newgate, who captains the Whitebeard pirates and refuses a letter from a member of the Red Hair pirates, claiming that if Shanks wants to talk to him, then he needs to do so in person. And as such, Shanks makes the decision to set sail and meet Whitebeard. But that is a story for not now. Catching up with the Straw Hats, and they have safely made it up to the White Sea, and after a brief encounter with the Sky Knight named Garnfall, they find their way to Angel Island, meeting the lovely father-daughter duo of Pagaya and Konus, who demonstrate and explain some sky technology to them. Using one of their funky devices known as a waver, Nami sets out alone to explore the Sky Realm, finding the island of Upper Yard and witnessing the power of the chief antagonist of the saga, God Enel. Enel is a citizen of another Sky Island who had eaten a devil fruit known as the Goro Goro no Mi, a Logia-type fruit that allows him to conjure, manipulate, and become electricity. Furthermore, he also possesses an ability known as Mantra, which allows him to sense the presence of other beings, giving him overwhelming power and omniscience, which for all intents and purposes does allow him to label himself as a god. The Straw Hats are eventually split up, with Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp facing off against and defeating one of Enel's priests, Satori, who he really likes balls. Meanwhile, the other Straw Hats come to the startling conclusion that Upper Yard was actually a part of Jaya Island, which was shot up into the air via the knock-up stream and may be where Lion Nolan's legendary City of Gold resides. And so, after reuniting, the crew hatch a plan to find it, but end up embroiled in a death game concocted by Enel, along with the native people of Upper Yard, the Shandians, led by Wiper, who are fighting Enel's forces to reclaim their homeland. During this game, 2 more of Enel's priests are beaten, one by the hands of Tony Chopper, and the other by the swords of Zoro. Furthermore, the leader of Enel's militia is convincingly beaten by our newest Straw Hat, Nico Robin. As the game comes to its climax, only 6 individuals remain conscious. The former god of Skypiea, Garnfall, the leader of the Shandian tribe, Wiper, Roronoa Zoro, Nico Robin, Nami, and Enel himself. Oh, and it should also be stated that Luffy was still up and running, however he wasn't included in this number as he was stuck inside a giant snake at the time. Despite being outnumbered, Enel swiftly disposed of everyone else with his devil fruit abilities, save for Nami, who he invited to come with him. Although eventually Luffy catches up with them and confronts Enel on the Arc Maxim, a device intended to facilitate the destruction of the entirety of Skypiea. However, due to the whole being rubber thing, Enel's lightning strikes have no effect on Luffy whatsoever, which causes Enel to make this face. Despite that, Enel manages to trap Luffy's arm in a bowl of gold and send him flying off the Arc. However, this is far from the end, and Luffy struggles to make his way back to Enel, climbing up Giant Jack with a golden hand and everything. But right before the final showdown, it is time for a flashback, focusing on a figure that we've heard a lot about at this point, Mont Blanc Noland. 400 years ago, Noland was an explorer who made frequent trips into the Grand Line, and one day he and his crew were caught in a storm, but they were saved by the sound of a bell, following which led them to the island of Jaya. He and Noland met and eventually befriended the Shandian tribe, becoming particularly close with the warrior Calgara, who showed Noland the City of Gold. Now, of course, complications ensued, but they were resolved, and Noland left the island promising to return. And after Noland returned to his kingdom in North Blue, he regaled the king with tales of his expedition and was subsequently ordered to take him to the City of Gold. However, after arriving in Jaya, Noland discovered that the Golden City, as well as the entire Shandian tribe, had disappeared. The king, thinking that Noland was some sort of ancient troll, then had Noland arrested and executed, and was successful in forever branding him as Liar Noland. However, the truth of the matter, as stated before, is that part of Jaya was launched into the sky, and once settled into the clouds, the Shandian tribe was immediately attacked by the armies of Skypiea, and Calgara was slain in battle, with neither he nor Noland ever knowing the fate of one another. But back in modern day, Enel unleashed his ultimate technique that instantly destroyed Angel Island and threatens to consume the entirety of Skypiea itself. Luffy, assisted by Nami, then makes his way up to the Arc for one final shot at taking Enel down, breaking his ultimate technique and then firing a fearsome punch directly at Enel, which sends him flying into the Golden Bell of Shandora, causing it to ring for the first time in 400 years and defeating Enel. And back on Jaya, Nolan's descendant Cricket hears this ringing as well as sees the gigantic shadow cast by Luffy and breaks down crying as his ancestors' words were finally confirmed to be true. In the aftermath of the battle, Garnfall reassumes his position as the god of Skypiea and begins working with the Shandian tribe to make Skypiea a place in which they can all live in peace. Prior to leaving the island, Robin discovers a poneglyph which reveals the location of another of the ancient weapons, this time being Poseidon. However, much to her surprise, another message is inscribed in the ancient language from none other than the former pirate king, Gol D. Roger. And after reading this, Robin comes to the conclusion that the true history of the world will be found on Raf Tel, the location in which Luffy must reach to become the next pirate king. The crew then departs Skypiea with a whole ton of gold acquired and take an octopus balloon back down to the Blue Sea in order to embark on their next adventure. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically sagas in minutes. The series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today, we'll be going on a dark journey of internal and external strife with the gut-punching saga that is Water 7. Water 7 is the fourth saga of the series, consisting of 4 arcs, which are told over a whopping 139 chapters and 110 anime episodes, so it's a sizable piece of story. And we commence with following the Straw Hats landing back onto the Blue Sea, as they quickly find themselves on the island of Long Ring Long Land. Here they meet a bunch of bizarre creatures including Tonjit, as well as a pirate named Foxy, who challenges the Straw Hats to a Davy Back fight, which is essentially a pirate contest that allows the winners of certain events to poach crew members, or even take the opposing crew's flag. And so a nice comical contest starts up, consisting of 3 events, culminating in Luffy donning an afro and defeating Captain Foxy in one of the most hilarious battles of One Piece history. And I very much hope you enjoyed this brief moment of comedy, because this is where things are going to start getting pretty real. First up, the crew encounter Marine Admiral Aokiji, a man of unfathomable power at this point in the story, who manages to easily dismiss Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, as well as warn the crew that Robin is a threat to the world due to her ability to read the ancient language, as well as a threat to them, as every organization that she has ever been a part of has ceased to exist, with her going on to be the only survivor. However, for Mr. Aokiji, this is a private visit, and he allows the Straw Hats to leave Long Ring Long Land because of Luffy's helpful actions in bringing down the corrupt warlord Sir Crocodile on Alabasta. However, being completely outclassed by a Marine Admiral is but one problem, as the crew also discover that their ship, the Going Merry, is in desperate need of repair, and so they travel to the shipbuilding island of Water 7 to find a shipwright to help. Having landed in Anime Venice, the crew splits up into 4 different groups, with Zoro staying with the ship, whilst Luffy, Nami, and Usopp took the gold attained from Skypiea in order to exchange it for 300 million berries. Meanwhile, Sanji goes off and does his own thing, as does Chopper and Robin. However, Robin soon encounters a mysterious figure in a mask, claiming to be a member of CP9, a term that Robin is apparently familiar with, and thus he abducts her. Luffy and Nami find their way to Dock 1 of the Galila Company to contract a shipwright to take a look at the Going Merry. However, after an inspection, it is deemed that the ship is unfixable due to having a broken keel. In the meantime, Usopp is attacked by thugs belonging to a group known as the Frankie family, who stole most of the money the Straw Hats traded for their gold. After discovering a beaten Usopp, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper, in an act of glorious revenge, rain all hell down upon the Frankie family base, completely destroying it, as well as defeating the entire family save for their leader Frankie, who had already taken the money and gone elsewhere. At this point, Luffy makes the tough decision to part with the Going Merry and to buy a new ship. A course of action that does not sit right with Usopp, who claims that Merry is as much their crewmate as anyone else, and starts an altercation with Luffy that culminates in Usopp leaving the crew and challenging Luffy to fight for the rights for the Going Merry. During this fight, Usopp displays a stunning evolution, able to hold his own against Luffy using the various technologies and tricks that he has acquired throughout his journey. However, ultimately Luffy still wins the battle, but tearfully leaves the Going Merry to Usopp as Luffy and the rest of the crew move onward. The next morning, the crew receives news that Iceberg, the mayor of Water 7, was shot by Robin. And just to make things even worse, it is announced that Aqua Laguna, a tidal wave that engulfs the lower part of Water 7, will be hitting the city that very night. As Luffy and the Straw Hats work to figure out what is happening with Robin, it becomes apparent that several members of Galila are in fact agents of CP9, a world government organization that specializes in espionage and assassination. Their mission on Water 7 was to acquire the blueprints for the ancient weapon Pluton, which were thought to be held by Iceberg, as well as capture Nico Robin and present her for execution on the judicial island of Enies. The group succeeded in the latter, blackmailing Robin by threatening to kill the other Straw Hat pirates and securing her cooperation in their plans. However, they failed to acquire the blueprints to Pluton, which were actually being held by Frankie. And as it happens, both Frankie and Iceberg were apprentices of a fisherman shipwright named Tom, who is best known for having built the Ora Jackson, a ship used by the former pirate king, Gol D. Roger. Knowing this, CP9 also moves to capture Franky and take him along with Robin aboard the sea train bound for Enies lobby. Shortly before the train departed, both Sanji and Usopp independently boarded it, managing to free Franky and attempt to rescue Robin. However, Usopp, having left the crew, took it upon himself to craft an alternate identity, becoming the superhero Saga King, because he was too ashamed to face the crew. Ultimately, their efforts would be unsuccessful though, as Franky was recaptured, while Sanji and Saga King were forced to regroup on another train with the rest of the crew. This train consisted of the remaining Straw Hats, the Franky family, and Galila, who had formed an alliance to pursue Robin, Franky, and deliver vengeance upon the agents who infiltrated Galila. And thus the small army went on to invade the island of Enies lobby. Luffy, being impatient and such, went marching on ahead and found his way to the Tower of Justice rather quickly, where he was pit against Bluno, and in order to swiftly defeat him, Luffy revealed Gear Second, a technique that he had developed after encountering Aokiji to ensure that he would be able to protect his crewmates. After taking down the cow lookalike, Luffy yelled for Robin at the top of his lungs, prompting the rest of CP9 to step out, and they would eventually be greeted with the 6 members of the Straw Hats who had come to declare war on the world government, but more importantly, reclaim Robin. After breaking into the Tower of Justice, the Straw Hats each faced off against various members of CP9, with many of them displaying power-ups of sorts, such as Nami's new and improved climb attack techniques, Sanji's Diablo Jumper, and Zoro's Ashura. During these fights, the idiotic leader of CP9, Spandam, also accidentally summoned a teeny tiny Buster Call on the island, which is a fleet of 10 marine battleships helmed by 5 vice admirals who are charged with destroying an entire island with no questions asked. This was also an event that Robin had witnessed once before, as she grew up on the island of Ohara, which was populated by scholars seeking the true history of the world. Upon discovering this, the world government had the island eradicated using a Buster Call. However, Robin survived due to the sympathetic actions of Vice Admiral Kuzan, who would go on to become Admiral Aokiji. However, due to Robin's knowledge, a bounty of 79 million berries was placed on her head at the age of 8 years old, and so she began a life consistently on the run, being betrayed by everyone she came into contact with until she met Crocodile and joined Baroque Works. And you know what, even then she was eventually betrayed by him, so yeah. Which was why it was all the more impactful when Robin found the Straw Hats and became part of their crew, because for the first time in her life, she had found a place where she belonged, with people that she felt she could trust. And so Robin eventually overcame her fear of the world government, as well as her resignation to death, and exclaimed to Luffy that she wanted to live, prompting the current events inside the Tower of Justice. With almost every member of CP9 defeated, Robin was then freed by Franky, and the Straw Hats began to face the full force of the Buster Call, whilst Luffy was still locked in combat with the final CP9 member, Rob Lucci. After giving everything he had to give, Luffy eventually overcame Lucci. However, the Straw Hats were still faced with an impossible situation, surrounded entirely by marine forces. And at that very moment, they all heard a voice prompting them to jump into the ocean, to which they did and landed on the Going Merry, which had come all the way to Enies lobby in order to rescue them after begging Iceberg to patch it up. Because by the way, in this world, some ships do have a sense of sentience, and the Going Merry happened to be one of them. After saving the crew, Merry began to completely break down, and it was decided that it was time to lay her to rest. The Straw Hat stayed with Merry as she burnt, and the ship gave a touching goodbye to the crew, grateful for the time she got to spend with them. And with that, an invaluable member of the Straw Hat Pirates was lost, but her legacy would live on within a new ship built by Franky, known as the Thousand Sunny. As it turns out, Franky's dream was to build a ship capable of sailing the entire world, and he had spent the money he stole from the Straw Hats on wood from the treasure tree Adam. Franky then gifted the ship to the Straw Hats and was even recruited to become their official shipwright, a position that the Franky family begged them to give him because as a result of his actions on Enies lobby, Franky had been assigned a bounty of 44 million berries. In fact, as it would turn out, all of the Straw Hats were given bounties, with Luffy's in particular being raised to a staggering 300 million berries. Prior to leaving Water 7, Luffy also received a visit from his grandfather, Monkey D. Garp, who was a Vice Admiral of the Marines. Garp then informed Luffy that the latter half of the Grand Line was known as the New World and was ruled by the Yonko, or the Four Emperors, one of which was Luffy's idol, Redhead Shanks. The others being Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world, and 2 as of yet unmet characters known only as Big Mom and Kaido. To top everything off, it was also revealed that Dragon was Luffy's father. Dragon being the man who saved Luffy in Loguetown, and who was known as the leader of the Revolutionary Army and the most wanted man in the world. Luffy also had a brief reunion with Kobe, who was serving under Garp and who had undergone quite a growth spurt and now held the dream of becoming a Marine Admiral. As the Straw Hats were about to leave Water 7 with Robin safely returned and a new recruit in Franky, all that was left was to reacquire Usopp, who would go on to apologize for his actions and be warmly welcomed back into the crew as they embarked on their next adventure. But just before we leave this saga, 2 more events of staggering importance to the greater world would occur. The first of which being a meeting between Shanks and Whitebeard, two of the aforementioned 4 emperors of the sea. Shanks had come to visit Whitebeard in order to warn him to call back Ace, who was in pursuit of Blackbeard, telling him that it was Blackbeard who dealt Shanks the scar on his face. However, Whitebeard refused to do so, and the two had somewhat of a heated disagreement, which ended in them both drawing their weapons and committing a single strike so powerful that it split the very sky above them clean open. At the same time, on Bonaro Island, it was too late anyway, as Ace had finally tracked down Blackbeard. Ace had been hunting him down to secure vengeance, as Blackbeard was responsible for the murder of Thatch, the 4th Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. Blackbeard committed this act in order to obtain a devil fruit that Thatch had discovered, known as the Yami Yami no Mi, a Logia-type fruit that gives its user the ability to conjure, manipulate, and become darkness, which is also said to be the most evil of all devil fruits. And Blackbeard goes on to demonstrate this power firsthand by engaging in combat with Fire Fist Ace, and while the results of this battle were unknown at the time, it would go on to be the catalyst for an entire saga to come. Hello and welcome to the Groundline Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically, Sagas in Minutes, the series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today, we'll be delving into one of the most mysterious areas of the world to take part in the adventure known as the Thriller Bark Saga. Thriller Bark is the 5th saga in the series, consisting of but a single arc spanning 48 chapters and 45 episodes, thus making it the shortest saga in the entire series thus far. After leaving Water 7, the Straw Hats have their sights set on traveling to Fishman Island. However, in order to get there, they are forced to enter a stretch of sea known as the Florian Triangle, which is categorized by being covered in fog so incredibly thick that sunlight simply cannot penetrate it. As a result, this area of the world is very creepy and mysterious, kind of like the beginning of a horror film, and expectations of this location are fulfilled immediately with the appearance of a ghost ship, and more importantly, a talking skeleton named Brooke, who is a self-proclaimed gentleman, despite his habit of continuously asking to see women's panties. Now, of course, there is an in-world explanation for this skeleton man, being that he consumed a devil fruit that allowed his soul to return to his body after death. However, due to the thick fog of the Florian Triangle, it took him an awfully long time to find his body, by which point it was just bones. Well, bones and an afro. And in a move that shocks everyone, Luffy immediately invites Brooke to join the Straw Hats, to which Brooke casually agreed. However, there are of course complications that need to be solved before this idea can be brought to fruition. These complications being that Brooke's shadow has been stolen, and in the One Piece world, if you do not have a shadow, apparently you burst into flames, old school vampire style, upon contact with sunlight. Now, Brooke's shadow was stolen by the ever fiendish Gecko Moria, a warlord of the sea who reigns supreme in the Florian Triangle, aboard the world's largest pirate ship, Thriller Bark. So there are two very important things to know about Gecko Moria. One, he has a distaste for performing any sort of physical activity whatsoever, and number two, he is building an army of zombies to allow him to take down his old rival, and now one of the emperors of the sea, Kaido. And beyond that, he is also pursuing the dream of becoming the Pirate King. And so the Straw Hats board Thriller Bark, resulting in a lot of zombie shenaniganry, and in the process, the shadows of Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Robin are all stolen by Moria. Now, Luffy, being worth a whopping 300 million berries these days, was deemed a powerful enough shadow to insert into a particularly special corpse, an alleged evil giant once named Oars. So with Luffy's shadow and Moria's powers, Oars is reanimated but with Luffy's personality. But more on him in a bit, because soon enough, the Straw Hats become engaged in a conflict with the Mysterious Four, a group of individuals, including Moria himself, who command the most power on Thriller Bark. In addition to Moria, we have Absalom, the user of the Suke no Mi, a devil fruit that allows him to turn invisible, and his motivations for the large majority of the arc are to forcibly marry Nami. He attempts this many times, one of which is put to a stop by an enraged Sanji, enraged for two reasons, the first of which being his own personal affections for Nami, and the other being the fact that consuming the Suke no Mi had always been a dream of his in order for him to be able to spy on naked ladies. Then we have Dr. Hogback, who is the mind behind fashioning together a legion of corpses for Moria to insert shadows into. Hogback was once well respected by Straw Hat member Tony Chopper, although this turned into fierce disgust once Chopper realized what Hogback was using his medical knowledge to achieve. And as for the final member of the Mysterious Four, we have Perona, a girl with the power of the Horo no Mi, which allows her to, amongst other things, conjure ghosts that force people into crippling depression. And unfortunately for her, she is matched up against Usopp, who holds a natural immunity to the ghosts due to the fact that he is already overly negative about life in general. In the meantime, Brooke also embarks on a mission to retrieve his shadow, which has been inserted into the corpse of a powerful legendary samurai named Ryuma. Brooke proves unable to defeat the samurai zombie, at which point Zoro steps in, eventually overcoming Ryuma, which not only returns Brooke's shadow, but also earns Zoro a shiny new sword named Shusui. And after the Straw Hats had taken down the primary members within Moria's crew, they are immediately forced into combat with Oars. And while this proves to be quite the spectacle, they are unable to overcome him, especially once Gecko Moria himself enters the zombie, and begins piloting him like a giant robot. However, elsewhere, a band of pirates who had become trapped on Thriller Bark see some hope in Luffy and insert 100 shadows into him, transforming him into Nightmare Luffy. Nightmare Luffy then goes on to prove exceptionally superior to Moria and Oars in every way. However, Oars would return to combat, requiring the entirety of the Straw Hat crew to work together to put him down for good. At this point, Gecko Moria assumes his final form by absorbing 1000 shadows. However, the power becomes too overwhelming for him to control, and he is defeated by Luffy in one-on-one combat, resulting in all of the shadows being returned to their previous owners. And this is usually where we'd start wrapping up the arc, I guess. However, there is a plot twist afoot here, and as it turns out, Gecko Moria was not the only warlord of the sea present on Thriller Bark, and Bartholomew Kuma emerges, easily defeating all of the heavily fatigued combatants remaining. All but Zoro, that is, who offers his own life in exchange for that of his captains. Kuma then agrees to the deal and uses his Devil Fruit abilities to remove all of the pain and fatigue from Luffy, passing it on to Zoro. However, phenomenally, Zoro survives this encounter, at which point Kuma promptly leaves the island, and when questioned what had occurred while everyone else was unconscious, Zoro simply claimed that nothing happened. Having defeated the big bad, a party then occurs, at which point we are treated to the tragic backstory of Brooke, who has a connection to the whale Laboon, whom the Straw Hats had met upon entering the Grand Line, and as it turns out, it is his dream to return to Reverse Mountain and deliver the last song of his long passed on pirate crew to the now adult whale who once followed them at sea. And in order to one day achieve this, Brooke officially joins the Straw Hats and they leave Thriller Bark. But not before the narrator ominously points out that while Thriller Bark had been anchored in the Florian Triangle for 10 years, the mystery surrounding the waters began long before that, and we get a glimpse of a certain creature in the fog that completely dwarfs the largest pirate ship in the world, and thus bringing an end to the Thriller Bark saga. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically, Sagas in Minutes. The series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today, we'll be covering a big one as we explore the climax of the first half of the series with the incredible Paramount War Saga. The Paramount War Saga is the 6th in the series, consisting of 108 chapters and 122 anime episodes. Both of which, sound pretty reasonable for a saga, but we actually have an astonishing amount of ground to cover within these boundaries. So much so that I have actually made the decision to split this saga up into 2 videos. Because even though this is meant to be a heavily abridged series, condensing it all into one video just doesn't do it any form of coherent justice. But with that in mind, let's begin this climactic journey. Following their departure of Thriller Bark, the Straw Hats arrive on the final island of the first half of the Grand Line, the Sabaody Archipelago, in search of a coating mechanic to treat their ship so that they may visit the underwater realm of Fishman Island. In this effort, they stumble upon the legendary figure Silvers Rayleigh, the first mate of the former Pirate King, who takes an immediate liking to Luffy and agrees to coat the Thousand Sunny. Here, the Straw Hats also make friends with a former enemy and a current mermaid. However, after the mermaid is captured and sold at a slave auction, Luffy reacts rather explosively and ends up punching a world noble in his excuse for a face. This action results in the immediate summoning of a marine admiral to the island, in this case Kizaru, an absurdly powerful man who wields a Logia Devil Fruit that allows him to conjure, manipulate, and become light. However, Luffy and the Straw Hats are not the only infamous group on the island at the moment, as rather fatefully, there are at least 9 other pirates present who hold bounties of over 100 million berries. These figures are going to become exceptionally important as we go forward, so to briefly go through them, we have the Roar of the Seas Scratchman Apu, the Magician Basil Hawkins, Capone Gang Beige, Red Flag Diaz Drake, Big Eater Jewelry Bonnie, Mad Monk Rouge, the Surgeon of Death Trafalgar Law, Massacre Soldier Killer, and Eustace Captain Kidd. And along with Luffy and Zoro, this group of 11 individuals are collectively dubbed as the Supernovas. But due to Luffy's actions, all hell breaks loose for each and every single one of them, forcing some to flee the island immediately, fight a legion of marines, or even face off against Admiral Kizaru directly, which did not go very well for those who went with option number 3, including the Straw Hats actually, who end up in a desperate situation facing off against Kizaru, as well as another dude who comes out of nowhere, and even Warlord of the Sea Bartholomew Kuma shows up for the action. In this no-win situation, the Straw Hats are briefly rescued by Silvers Rayleigh. However, after a super secret discussion with Kuma, Rayleigh allows him to split up the Straw Hats and send them flying all over the globe with the powers of his Devil Fruit, the Nikyu Nikyu no Mi. Luffy struggles desperately to stop this, but he must endure watching his entire crew disappear before his eyes, one by one, until he finally succumbs to the same fate, with Bartholomew Kuma's parting words to Luffy being that the two of them will not meet again. As a result of Kuma's powers, Luffy and the rest of the Straw Hats are sent flying for 3 days before landing on the respective islands that they were sent to. In Luffy's case, he was sent to Amazon Lily, an island located within the Calm Belt, which serves as the home to the all-female Kuja tribe, as well as Warlord of the Sea, Boa Hancock. And after walking in on her bathing, Luffy is eventually forced into combat with the Gorgon sisters, but after proving immune to the charms of Hancock, as well as being a bit of a boss in the Coliseum, Boa has a change of heart. A massive change of heart actually, which causes her to fall head over heels in love with Luffy. These feelings are not reciprocated. Shortly after, Luffy receives the news that his brother Portghasti Ace has been apprehended by the Marines, thus essentially informing us that Ace lost his fight against Blackbeard on Bonaro Island. And not only that, but Ace was also scheduled to be executed, prompting Luffy to change his plans of finding his crew in order to save his brother. A love-struck Boa Hancock then agrees to help her new infatuation, and they set sail for Impel Down, the world's most secure prison, with Hancock planning on using her status as a warlord of the sea to sneak Luffy in. However, in doing this, she also agrees to respond to a summoning to Marineford, where the full force of the Marines had been gathering, anticipating an all-out war with Emperor of the Sea and the strongest man in the world, Whitebeard. In fact, the Marines were provoking this war, using Whitebeard's subordinate Ace as bait to lure out his full forces into an unfavorable combat situation. And as such, pretty much every Marine we've ever met in the series is seen preparing for the upcoming battle. Meanwhile, Luffy was successfully able to infiltrate Impel Down thanks to the help of Hancock, and he finds himself causing a fair bit of chaos, attempting to get all the way down to level 6, where Ace is being held. During this time, he collects a makeshift crew of former enemies, many of whom actually have Luffy to thank for being imprisoned, but that doesn't stop them from forming a greatest hits group and bursting their way through to level 4 of the prison. At this point, they encounter the prison warden Magellan, who rather easily deals with Luffy due to his ridiculous devil fruit, which is a paramecia type that allows him to generate and control poison. After his defeat, Luffy is dumped on level 5 to die, but he and his last remaining ally, Bon Clay, are saved by a mysterious figure named Inazuma, who takes the duo to the secret level 5.5 of Impel Down, also known as Newcomer Land, which is governed by Emporio Ivankov, Queen of the Kalmbaka Kingdom and a member of the Revolutionary Army, conveniently led by Luffy's father, Monkey D. Dragon. As a result, not only does Ivankov save Luffy with his devil fruit abilities, but he also agrees to assist Luffy in saving Ace, believing that Ace may also be the son of his comrade Dragon. And so, with Ivankov and Inazuma's power behind him, Luffy finally makes it to level 6, only to discover that Ace had already been taken to Marineford for his scheduled execution. However, this was far from a fruitless endeavor, as Luffy gathers 2 more allies, one being Jinbei, a former warlord of the sea who refused to take part in the upcoming war against Whitebeard and was thus arrested, as well as Sir Crocodile, another former warlord who Luffy defeated on Alabasta. This group, along with the newcomer forces and an ever-growing army of prisoners, proved to be incredibly overwhelming for the guards of Impel Down to deal with. However, at the same time that this breakout is being conducted, the prison is also invaded from the outside, as Blackbeard, now a warlord himself, as a result of capturing Ace, storms the prison in search of strong individuals to serve as part of his crew. And with so much chaos occurring throughout the facility, Magellan then makes the single worst decision of the entire arc and decides to free a former warden named Shiryu, who had been imprisoned for gross abuse of power, and requested his assistance on the matter. But of course, in predictable fashion, Shiryu immediately betrays this trust by slaughtering the guards that were sent to free him. But with one set of people attempting to escape the prison and another set attempting to infiltrate, it was only natural that these 2 factions would meet on their respective journeys, resulting in Luffy immediately kicking into combat against Blackbeard, as he was responsible for Ace's current situation. But Luffy would be stopped by Jinbei, wisely advising him that this is not the time or the place, and the 2 groups peacefully parted ways, with Blackbeard's final words of warning being that in a few hours, they'll put on a show that'll shake the world. This peaceful parting of ways would not continue though, as Blackbeard and his crew soon ran into Magellan, who swiftly dealt with the entire crew with his poison and left them to die. However, in a stunning display of fate, the crew would be saved by Shiryu, who provided them with an antidote to Magellan's poison, and so they continued on their journey to level 6. Meanwhile, despite a relentless pursuit from the warden Magellan, Luffy's group are eventually able to escape from the prison as the A-team, consisting of Crocodile, Bones, and Buggy, make their way to secure a marine battleship, and Jinbei invokes one of his many incredible powers to summon a legion of whale sharks to escort the remaining prisoners to the ship. However, this escape was not without cost, as Bon Clay stayed behind using his devil fruit abilities to impersonate Magellan in order to force the employees of the prison to open the gates of justice, thus allowing Luffy and the prisoners to properly escape. Rather awkwardly though, the real Magellan then storms in, wondering exactly what's going on, and finds Bon Clay. He then asks him if he has any last words, to which Bon Clay smugly gives a one-word answer, being satisfaction. And so Luffy and his group gratefully accept Bon Clay's selfless assistance and set sail towards their new destination of Marineford. Meanwhile, at the headquarters, only 3 hours remain until the public execution of Ace, as he is being forced to walk up a lengthy set of stairs to his very own execution platform. In the process, remembering a promise he once made to Luffy to live a life without regret and with more freedom than anybody else, thus bringing an end to the first half of the Paramount War saga. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically Sagas in Minutes, the series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today, we'll be continuing with the most explosive saga in the series to date, with Part 2 of the Paramount War. The Paramount War saga, as stated in the previous video, is the sixth in the series, consisting of 108 chapters and 122 anime episodes. And where we last left off, Luffy had assembled a makeshift crew of former enemies and newfound friends to escape the world's most secure prison, Impel Down, and is now en route to Marineford in order to rescue his brother Ace from execution. However, the action is not simply going to wait for our protagonist, as at Marineford a force of roughly 100,000 marines had been assembled in preparation for a conflict with Whitebeard, one of the 4 emperors of the sea and the strongest man in the world. Amongst them are a litany of old faces that we've encountered in the series thus far, as well as some newcomers to the audience, with particular note needing to go to Admiral Akainu, a mysterious figure whose brutality and absolute justice is already notorious at this point in the series. His presence also signifies the first time that we have seen the 3 admirals gathered together in one place, and collectively, they make up the greatest military power that the Marines are capable of mustering. And in addition to this, the 5 remaining members of the 7 Warlords of the Sea also stand primed and ready for action. However, there is at least one figure who remains tentative about the events to come, being Vice Admiral Garp, grandfather of Monkey D. Luffy and caretaker of the man sentenced to be executed, Cocoyasi Ace. It is then revealed to the world that in addition to being the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, Ace is also the biological son of the former pirate king, Goldie Roger, adding further evidence to the claim that he must be extinguished from the world. However, the world was not simply going to stand by and let this happen, as its strongest man boldly set sail into Marineford, accompanied not only by his 16 core divisions, but also a fleet of allied pirates, ready to wage war on the world government in order to rescue Ace. You see, one of the most notable things about Whitebeard is that he does not simply collect comrades and allies. He is a man who values family above all else, and everyone who joins him, even if they aren't a direct member of the Whitebeard Pirates, is considered a son of this man. And so they were more than ready to fight for the life of their brother. As such, the Paramount War would commence with an opening attack from Whitebeard, who used his Devil Fruit powers to craft a tidal wave that threatened to engulf Marineford, a move which was countered by the ice powers of Marine Admiral Aokiji, and after that, all hell broke loose. To briefly examine Whitebeard's forces, the 2 people of particular note were the 1st Division Commander Marco the Phoenix, who possessed a mythical Zoan type that allowed him to transform into a phoenix, and 3rd Division Commander Diamond Jozu, who wielded a Paramecia type fruit allowing him to transform his body into diamond. And in true top tier form, these 2 would go on to have immediate skirmishes with Marine Admiral Kizaru and Dracula Mihawk respectively, instantly proving that this was no simple conflict and that the world would be irrevocably changed no matter which side won this battle. Of course, it did not take too long for the casualties to begin, with the first of note being Little Oz Jr., who was fighting because Ace once gave him a hat, which, you know, is a pretty solid reason for fighting. Regardless, he was outmatched by Don Quixote Doflamingo, who sliced off his foot and was then skewered through the stomach by the powers of Gecko Moria. But it was not simply 2 sides fighting here, as soon enough Luffy and his jailbreak squad made something of a grand entrance onto the battlefield, captivating the attention of everyone with his group, containing 2 former Warlords of the Sea and a member of the Revolutionary Army. Oh, and Buggy the Clown was also there. Leaping straight into action in a classic Luffy manner, he got into a verbal argument with the strongest man in the world regarding who was going to save Ace, after which Whitebeard took an immediate liking to Luffy and would go on to order his forces to protect him at all costs, after witnessing his potential, which occurred in the form of a powerful burst of Conqueror's Haki that coated the battlefield. This would not be the only sign of Luffy's potential though. In fact, a far more terrifying ability was prominently on display during the entirety of his campaign at Marineford. You see, the thing is that Luffy did not belong on this battlefield. He was constantly surrounded by figures who dwarfed him in both power and experience. However, Luffy was a true force to be reckoned with here, because wherever he went, a powerful ally would follow. For example, instead of getting into a fight with Gecko Moria, Jinbei stepped in to deal with the spooky warlord. Elsewhere, after being assaulted by Smoker, Boa Hancock arrived and summarily dismissed him. And when Luffy was faced with Bartholomew Kuma, Emporio Ivankov entered the fray and allowed him to proceed onwards to free Ace. And all of this was noted by a single individual on the battlefield, being the world's greatest swordsman Dracula Mihawk, who had his own Luffy moment after the 5th Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, Vista, leapt in to defend him from certain demise. But even with this, Mihawk came to the realization that despite his lack of strength at this time, Luffy possessed by far the most formidable ability in the world. Although even this power could only take Luffy so far at this time, as eventually he found himself face to face with all 3 Marine Admirals. And while he did come up with an unconventionally clever Luffy ploy to attempt to get past them, he was met with a kick from Kizaru and forced back. During this time, chaos continued to erupt all throughout the battlefield, with matchup after matchup of world figures such as Crocodile vs Doflamingo, Marco vs Aokiji, and when Whitebeard got serious, well, he was just casually bringing down giants in single hits. We also probably shouldn't ignore that during all of this, Buggy was failing upwards and gathering a loyal legion of followers as a result of his exceptionally lucky encounters with world figures. This got to the point where his followers stole a visual Denden Mushi, and Buggy improvised a commercial of sorts for himself, claiming that he was a former member of the Roger Pirates, which, he was, and thus profoundly spreading his name throughout the world in a single burst. Another character of note would be Kobe, who was struggling with the thought of fighting against Luffy, and then when he did finally resolve to do it, he got a swift punch in the face hole for his efforts. And as Ace's execution drew nearer and nearer, Luffy was finally given the chance to get straight up to the platform, courtesy of Inazuma. However, this time the man who would stop his advance would be the hero of the Marines and Luffy's grandfather, Monkey D. Garp, who claimed that if Luffy wanted to pass, then he would have to kill him first. But what happened next would astound everybody as the two began to clash. However, Garp was hit by a sudden surge of emotion, remembering Luffy and Ace's children, and so he allowed Luffy to punch him, and Garp plummeted off the bridge, much to the extreme shock of every Marine watching at the time. But with that, Luffy had finally made it to the execution platform, although there was still one unfathomable challenge awaiting him in Fleet Admiral Sengoku, who invoked his mythical Zoan Devil Fruit powers immediately, but was countered by Luffy's rubbery, balloony goodness. And now at this stage, I should point out that Galdino, a former enemy and one of the prisoners Luffy sprung from Impel Down, had infiltrated the Marines in the guise of an executioner and was currently on the platform with Luffy and Sengoku. And in fact, it's all thanks to Galdino producing a wax key that Luffy was finally able to free Ace. And with Fire Fist Ace proudly on the loose, the tide of battle finally began to turn towards the favor of the Whitebeard pirates. Ace's Logia powers proved so devastating that he even fought Marine Admiral Aokiji to a standstill. However, even with his goal accomplished, Whitebeard was determined to continue the battle, issuing a final order to his crew to return to the New World and stating that this would be where they part ways, claiming that no ship would be capable of carrying him into the new era. But this declaration would not be the end of the tragedy of Marineford, far from it actually, as shortly after Ace was goaded into replying to Admiral Akainu after he insulted Whitebeard. Ace then thrust himself into combat, only to discover that even his fire was incapable of overcoming the magma abilities of Akainu's Devil Fruit. However, Ace was able to accomplish one thing, and that was saving Luffy's life, because just as Akainu was about to kill him, Ace shielded Luffy with his body and received a fatal blow through the chest. At this moment, a contingent of forces including Jinbei, Marco, and Vista arrived to combat Akainu, but they were too late. Ace, mere moments away from death, provided some parting words to Luffy, apologizing for not being able to be rescued, but also telling Luffy that he truly believed that he could become the Pirate King. His final words were then directed at Whitebeard, his fellow crewmates, and of course Luffy, as he thanked them for loving him, the son of a criminal despised throughout the civilized world. And with that, the time of Podcasty Ace had officially run out. He collapsed in death with a trademark Will of D smile on his face and leaving Luffy in a near catatonic state of despair. Meanwhile, Garp had a very different reaction, enraged to the point where he had to be restrained by Sengoku and threatening to kill Akainu for his actions here. Garp was not the only one after Akainu's head though, as he was soon confronted directly by Whitebeard and swiftly beat down by the world's strongest man. Although it should be said that Akainu did manage to blow off a huge chunk of Whitebeard's head in the process. And it would be here, at the 11th hour, that a new contingent arrived at Marineford, consisting of the known members of the Blackbeard Pirates and a cohort of escapees from level 6 of Impel Down. Whitebeard wasted no time in attacking Blackbeard, who was responsible for killing a former division commander, as well as condemning Ace to this fate in the first place. But with everything said and done, Whitebeard was unable to deliver the final killing blow, and the collective forces of the Blackbeard Pirates assaulted him with a barrage of fatal attacks that would bring an end to the story of Whitebeard. As for his final words, Whitebeard chose to set the world ablaze by claiming that one day, someone will arise to challenge the world and shoulder centuries of history, and further exclaimed that the One Piece did indeed exist before drawing his final breath. From here, we are given a glimpse of Whitebeard as a young man, showing that his dreams in the world of piracy never had to do with wealth, fame, or power, and instead, Whitebeard's true desire in life had only ever been to have a family. Whitebeard then passed from this world after taking a total of 267 sword wounds, 152 bullets, 46 cannonballs, a laser beam through the chest, and a magma fist to the face. But even with all of that, his body remained standing. At this point, Blackbeard enacted the next stage of his grand plan, covering Whitebeard's body and somehow managing to acquire his Devil Fruit, thus becoming the first known character in the series to wield 2 Devil Fruit abilities, which he swiftly put to use, starting a battle with Fleet Admiral Sengoku. Meanwhile, Akainu had recovered and was relentlessly pursuing Luffy, determined to kill him before he became a threat to the world government. In the end, a variety of allies came to Luffy's aid once more, with a particularly unexpected appearance from fellow supernova Trafalgar Law, who offered to facilitate Luffy's escape aboard his submarine. But the most surprising act came from the most unlikely of individuals, being Koby, who stood in the way of Akainu, claiming that the Marines had accomplished their mission and that any further bloodshed was a waste of human life. And while Koby was prepared to die for his insubordination, this act would be one of the most pivotal moments of the war, as it allowed the time for Emperor of the Sea Redhead Shanks and his crew, the Red Hair Pirates, to arrive onto the battlefield. And here, they made an ultimatum to all parties, claiming that if anybody still wanted to fight, then they would be going up against them. After which point Blackbeard wisely decided to retreat, and Fleet Admiral Sengoku officially declared that the Paramount War was over. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically, welcome to Sagas in Minutes, the very occasionally produced series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today, we are finally going to be concluding the massive piece of story that was the Paramount War Saga. So I've stated this a couple of times already, but the Paramount War Saga is the 6th in the series, consisting of 108 manga chapters and 122 anime episodes. And in previous editions, we have explored the Straw Hat separation, Luffy's adventures in Impel Down, and spent an entire episode covering the events of the Paramount War itself. And today, we find ourselves covering the post-war events of this saga. And we pick up in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Marineford. The strongest man in the world, Edward Newgate, has fallen, and the Marines have emerged victorious. And this is an event that would reshape the world as we know it, with pirates everywhere immediately springing into action to claim Whitebeard's former territories in an effort to fill the power vacuum left by the death of one of the 4 emperors of the sea. One such example of this would be Brownbeard, who attacked the town of Foodvalton and claimed that he now ruled the island. Well, we'll see how long that lasts, Brownbeard? But repercussions of the war aren't simply condensed to those affected by Whitebeard, as the world government has also begun to readjust the warlord system, and the powers that be judged that Gecko Moria was now too weak to be amongst their ranks, assigning fellow warlord Doflamingo to assassinate him, although this attempt was ultimately unsuccessful. To start filling the vacancies left by Moria and Blackbeard though, the world government invite a most unlikely candidate into their ranks, being Buggy the Clown, who made a name for himself during the battle, mainly through shooting propaganda videos. But nonetheless, Buggy had developed an impressive following and would come to accept this offer and become a warlord of the sea. Meanwhile, in a more somber state, Luffy was taken to Amazon Lily, and having regained consciousness, he is now lamenting Ace's death, which becomes our gateway into a most unanticipated Luffy flashback, where we find ourselves on Dawn Island 10 years prior to the modern day. This story tells of how Luffy's grandfather Garp took him to be raised by mountain bandits after being, in Garp's own words, influenced to become a pirate by Redhead Shanks. So at this point, Luffy has his straw hat, as well as his dream to become the Pirate King. The bandit group he was dropped off with was led by Curly Dedan, a name that has come up before in the series, being mentioned by Whoopslap. Remember Whoopslap? But also present within the bandits' territory is a young Port Gasti Ace, whom Garp had also taken in and then promptly dropped off with bandits after a request from his rival Goldie Roger, the father of Mr. Ace. Now Luffy, being the charming boy he is, immediately attempted to make friends with Ace, despite the fact that Ace had spat on him and very clearly wanted nothing to do with him. But as we all know, Luffy is persistent, and eventually, after a montage, he stumbles upon Ace and another boy by the name of Sabo in a series of events whereby Luffy was captured by a member of a group known as the Blue Jam Pirates, specifically by the member Porchemi. And now, in what is probably one of the darkest moments in One Piece history, Porchemi proceeds to torture a very young Luffy until he is eventually saved by Ace and Sabo, which acts as something of a bonding experience, and the 3 boys soon become friends. And shortly after that, they even take things to the next level by becoming brothers through the ritual drinking of sake. Now, something important to note about Sabo is that he comes from a very different background to Luffy and Ace. And in fact, Sabo is the son of nobility of the Goa Kingdom, the ruling faction of Dawn Island, specifically a man named Outlook III, who hired the Blue Jam Pirates to find and return Sabo, which they successfully did. And after being re-indoctrinated into his life of aristocracy, Sabo soon discovers a plan to cleanse the Goa Kingdom by setting fire to the entirety of the Grey Terminal, an area of the island where the poorest of the poor reside. And this was being done because a world noble was on their way to inspect the Goa Kingdom. And so Sabo ran away once more in an attempt to warn everyone, but it was too late as the fire had already been ignited, also trapping Luffy, Ace, and the Blue Jam Pirates amongst it. Now, the majority of the citizens, including Sabo actually, would go on to be saved by a certain Monkey D. Dragon, who invoked a particular power to provide the Great Terminal residents with a path to safety, and even offering those who desired it a place amongst his revolutionary army. In the meantime, amongst the blaze, Ace Ace and Dadan became locked in combat with Captain Blue Jam, while Luffy was taken to safety by the rest of the mountain bandits. But together, Ace and Dadan would have a hard-fought battle, but they would eventually overcome Blue Jam, with Dadan becoming greatly injured in the process and being carried back to the bandit residence by Ace. Although by this time, Sabo had made the decision to set sail and fulfill his dream of becoming a pirate. Unfortunately though, he picked quite probably the worst possible time and day to do so, as his quote-unquote ship aesthetically offended the visiting world noble, who immediately took out a massive bazooka-style gun and fired it directly on Sabo, leading us to believe that Sabo perished that day. Spoiler alert, he didn't, and we never believed that. Ace and Luffy did though, and that's what's important. In fact, they both took Sabo's death particularly hard, although Ace eventually summoned up the resolve to say to Luffy that they had to live their lives with no regrets. That one of these days, they were going to live lives freer than anybody. They were bound to make enemies, and their lives would be in constant danger, but they would be free. Ace then decided that he and Luffy would each set sail when they reached the age of 17, a time which came swiftly for Ace, and then also for Luffy, which took us back into the modern day, with Luffy still gutted over the death of Ace and disgusted by the fact that he was too weak to have saved him. But instead of Ace being here to comfort Luffy, this time that role would fall to Jinbei, who proceeded to lovingly strangle Luffy and force him to remember that he still had his crew. All of the Straw Hats were out there, ready and waiting to resume their adventure with Luffy. But a reunion would not be quite that simple. This is because by this time Rayleigh had literally swam to Amazon Lily, because that's just what a living legend can do, casually swim through the calm belt like that. But upon arriving on the island, he offered to train Luffy in the art of Haki, a power system that had made vague appearances before now, but that we had never really delved into. But this offer would be the catalyst of Luffy deciding that the Straw Hat Pirates would take a 2-year hiatus. And in order to pass this message on to the rest of the crew, Luffy, Jinbei, and Rayleigh caused a big scene by sailing to the remains of Marineford in the guise of paying their respects to the departed Ace. However, rather sneakily, Luffy was also sporting a tattoo on his arm sure to be photographed and published in newspapers all around the world, which read as 3D2Y, with the 3D crossed out, implying that instead of meeting up in 3 days, they were instead going to reunite on Sabaody in 2 years. And all of the Straw Hats immediately understood this message, as well as the fact that they themselves needed to get stronger so that they could not only achieve their own dreams, but also allow Luffy to reach his dream of becoming the Pirate King. And this led to an unwavering display of loyalty amongst the crew, especially from Zoro, who had been sent to Kuragana Island, the home of Drake Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman. This was the man that Zoro had his sights set on defeating. However, for the sake of Luffy, Zoro got on his hands and knees and begged Mihawk to train him. And all of the Straw Hats would find themselves in similarly convenient situations thanks to the efforts of Bartholomew Kuma. In regards to Nami, she was now present on a tiny sky island known as Weatheria, where she would be able to study and innovate with the world's leading weather scientist. Usopp was plonked on the Boyne Archipelago, where he would meet Heracles and be taught about all sorts of incredibly dangerous yet powerful plants that could be harnessed for a variety of purposes, very much including combat. Sanji, to his eternal dismay, was sent to the Kanbaka Kingdom, the land of Okama ruled by Emporio Ivankov, who you may remember was an ally of Luffy during the Impel Down and Marineford arcs. And after a rough start to say the least, Sanji took up the challenge of defeating the 99 masters of Newcomer Kempo, with each of them holding a special recipe for a dish designed to drastically improve a certain aspect of anybody who consumes it. Chopper would end up within the Torino Kingdom in South Blue, which while it initially seems like a fairly backwards tribal area of the world, was actually home to an extensive library of various rare and unique medical texts that once belonged to a significantly advanced culture. Nico Robin was probably given the rawest deal of all at first, being sent to the bridge nation of Tequila Wolf, a bridge that has been under construction for 700 years at the time of Robin's arrival, where she was captured and made a slave until being rescued by the Revolutionary Army and then accepting their offer to travel to Baltigo, and therefore spent the 2-year time skip incorporating all of the knowledge that the organization had gathered, led by Luffy's father, Monkey D. Dragon. Frankie found himself on Karakuri Island, which as it turns out was the birthplace of the legendary world government scientist Dr. Vegapunk, as well as home to one of his former laboratories. Well, 2 of his former labs, which was very good use of Frankie after he accidentally self-destructed one of them. Luckily, that was the least important one. And finally, Brooke, in probably the weirdest situation of all, landed on Namakura Island in the middle of a cultist ritual, after which he was worshipped as Satan for quite some time, before being abducted by select members of a Long-Arm tribe and becoming a traveling sideshow attraction, all the while working on his musical prowess that would eventually see him turn into a global superstar. As for the rest of the world though, the other notable factor is that the entirety of the Worst Generation minus Luffy, Zoro, and Law, the latter of who was currently on Amazon Lily after having treated Luffy's injuries, all embarked into the new world, with many facing immediate challenges of the world's most unpredictable sea. And that just leaves us with Luffy, who was taken to the island of Rusukaina by Rayleigh to begin his Haki training. And after demonstrating the basics of all 3 forms of Haki, Luffy realized that he had encountered these powers over the course of his journey and was astonished at Rayleigh's capacity in regards to wielding them. However, before finally beginning his training, there was one thing left to do. 2, as Luffy removed his straw hat, ceremoniously indicating that he was putting his pirate journey on hold, only to be recommenced in 2 years' time. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically Sagas in Minutes, the series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today we are heading into the new world at last in order to examine the first block of post-time skip story, being the Fishman Island saga. The Fishman Island saga is the 7th in the series, as well as the first of the New World era, which takes place over the course of 2 arcs with a total of 56 manga chapters and a very suspiciously long 57 anime episodes. So we are well and truly into anime filler territory here. But oddly enough, we pick up right where we left off on Ruskaina with a shot of the iconic straw hat. Except this time, there has been a 2-year time skip. And during this time, Luffy appears to have made quite a lot of animal friends. However, the point to resume his journey to become the Pirate King has come. And Boa Hancock arrives to escort him back to Sabaody in order to meet up with the rest of his crew. And good God, well, they've all either gained weight, decreased in aesthetic appeal, or have changed species entirely from a reindeer to a fox. It's just amazing what 2 years can do to a person. Thankfully, these straw hats are all 100% fake, as a crew led by one Damara Black has sprung up during Luffy's absence to take advantage of their notoriety. However, rather unfortunately for Damara Black, he ends up accidentally encountering the real Straw Hat Luffy, which does not end well for him. No, not at all. But amongst all of this trash are of course the gems that are the real Straw Hats, all of whom have evolved over their 2 years of various training, and the crew slowly begins to find each other and reform. Their ship, the Thousand Sunny, is also present, thanks largely to Bartholomew Kuma, who struck a deal with Dr. Vegapunk to reprogram him to protect the vessel until a member of the Straw Hats return to it. With that said, things are not all fine and dandy on the archipelago, because a force of Marines and Pacifista are on the hunt for the Straw Hats, which results in our first proper post-time skip altercation, whereby Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji all have the opportunity to demonstrate how much they have grown by near instantly dispatching the cyborg warriors. As for the rest of the Marines, various Straw Hat allies had gathered to assist their escape, including Luffy's mentor and former right-hand man of Goldie Roger, Silver's Rayleigh. And just before heading off on his journey, the last words Luffy says to Rayleigh are, "I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the Pirate King," which brings a tear to the eye of the elderly legend, who then proceeds to engage in a sneaky flashback of the day where he first met Roger, and it is revealed that one of the previous owners of Luffy's straw hat was in fact Roger himself. Back to the Straw Hats now, and they have no real time to enjoy their reunion, as thanks to Rayleigh having coated their ship, they dive straight down to visit Fishman Island, with Nami flawlessly navigating their way to the ocean floor, only to be met by a band of representatives from the new Fishman Pirates. And interestingly enough, these pirates appear to be aware of the Straw Hats' history, recognizing Luffy as the man who had beaten Arlong in East Blue, but they are also aware that they protected Hachan, and so the Straw Hats are given 2 choices: either join the new Fishman Pirates, or be sunk right here and now. So naturally, of course, Luffy and his crew take option 3, which is to force their way into Fishman Island via a coup de burst, which dispels its coating and scatters the Straw Hats all over the island, with the first group waking up in a house owned by Kami, who was the mermaid that they had all met on their first trip to Sabaody. And soon enough, they also meet up with another acquaintance, being Papug, who has become an exceptionally famous fashion designer, rich enough to have bought a house in the very ritzy Giovoli Hills. Whilst all of this is occurring though, a much darker side to Fishman Island is slowly playing out, firstly featuring the aforementioned new Fishman Pirates, who are revealed to be led by a figure known as Hody Jones, with their intended mission being something of a revolution, aiming to take control of Fishman Island and spread their anti-human sentiments amongst its people, or I guess amongst its fishmen. Very notably, Hody and his primary crew members were heavily inspired by the ambitions of Arlong, who himself derived his hatred of humans as a result from his experiences with Fisher Tiger, who is, well, he's one of the more tragic figures in this world. Having once been taken as a slave by the world nobles, and even though he did manage to escape, Tiger would return to the Holy Land of Marijois by scaling the Red Line in order to launch a full-on assault of the world nobles. Whilst there, he sought to free as many slaves as he could, which quite notably featured a very young Boa Hancock and the rest of the Gorgon sisters. After returning from this endeavor, Fisher Tiger then formed the Sun Pirates, an all-Fishman crew heavily populated by former slaves who embarked on the mission of wreaking havoc against the world of humanity and providing a ray of hope for the future of the Fishman race. And this crew included many well-known figures to the modern story, featuring Arlong, Hachan, and even Jinbei. However, tragedy would strike this crew when they took a child named Koala aboard, a human, but also a former slave. As such, Tiger agreed to return Koala to her home island. However, the residents of the island returned this kindness by alerting the Marines to their presence, which resulted in Tiger escaping, but sustaining heavy injuries. And after refusing a transfusion of human blood, Tiger passed away, admitting that he could never accept humanity, but also asking his crewmates not to let their own personal hatred affect the next generation. And opinion amongst the Sun Pirates was very split on that last idea, with Arlong's personal hatred hatred spreading to Hody Jones, and the new Fishman Pirates were formed as a result of that. However, this group in the modern day also had another ally in their endeavor, who was a man named Vanderdecken IX, who had, I guess what we'll call, a cripplingly unhealthy infatuation with the mermaid princess Shirahoshi, so much so that she had needed to be locked up for the better part of a decade due to his devil fruit powers and fear for her safety. But Decken and the new Fishman Pirates then formed an alliance, vowing to change Fishman Island forever. Having briefly brought up Fishman royalty though, eventually Luffy and a cohort of Straw Hats are found by King Neptune, who invites them to his palace, at which point Luffy stumbles upon the aforementioned Princess Shirahoshi, and after a rocky start to this relationship, the two very quickly become friends and allies, with Luffy even offering to be her bodyguard so that Shirahoshi can go and visit her mother's grave. Now speaking of, Shirahoshi's mother is the second historical figure of grand importance here, being Queen Otohime, who acted as Fisher Tiger's polar opposite, using her life and position primarily to advocate for Fishman-human relations, and harboring a dream of one day living in peace with humanity on the surface. And her pure drive to attain this would be displayed one day when a ship carrying a world noble became wrecked on the island, which would have resulted in the immediate murder of said noble under regular circumstances. However, Otohime risked her own life in order to save his, and then went on to accompany him to the surface in order to discuss her dream with the rest of the world nobles. After returning, Otohime received overwhelming public support, only to be assassinated by a younger Hody Jones, who framed a human for her death and thus restarted the cycle of hatred on Fishman Island. In the modern day, Hody Jones decided to attack the Ryugu Palace, which resulted in him getting ever so slightly wrecked by Zoro, even though the battle took place underwater. However, the new Fishman Pirates did eventually capture King Neptune and held him hostage in Gyonkod Plaza, where they gathered their full forces, totaling roughly 100,000 members, and decided that this was the time to usurp control of the entire island. Also, at this stage, the new Fishman Pirates had accessed a special energy steroid, which powered them up significantly, turning Hody Jones from this into this. In the meantime, Luffy had escorted Shirahoshi to Otohime's final resting place, at which point they were met by Jinbei, who is quite shocked to see Shirahoshi, to say the least. And after a relatively pleasant reunion, things quickly turn when Jinbei informs Luffy of the complicated history involving Fisher Tiger and Otohime, as well as requests that Luffy stays out of this issue due to the long-standing Fishman grudge against humans. But Luffy of course cares not for such things, and the two get into a fistfight, which is eventually calmed down by Robin, and the group form a plan to stop Hody. And this plan is fairly simple: launch an all-out assault on Gyonkod Plaza, defeat the new Fishman Pirates, and party the night away. And most of this goes quite smoothly, with Luffy knocking out half of their forces with Conqueror's Haki, and each of the officer members of the new Fishman Pirates are defeated with great ease by the Straw Hats, who each finally get to show off their new post-time skip skills. There is certainly trouble in one aspect though, that being Vanderdecken, who after being publicly rejected by Shirahoshi, used his devil fruit powers to send an ancient vessel known as the Noah flying her way, which actually threatens to crash into and destroy Fishman Island. And this would also come to serve as battleground for Luffy to face off against Hody Jones, which proves quite difficult for Luffy actually, because he is at a distinct disadvantage underwater. However, he does eventually prevail, and then makes the decision to destroy the Noah in order to prevent it from crashing into the island. As it turns out, these efforts would not be needed though, as Shirahoshi then reveals a super special power in that she can communicate with Sea Kings, who appear and take the Noah back to its resting place, thus saving Fishman Island. And Shirahoshi is able to do this because, as it turns out, she has inherited the power of the ancient weapon Poseidon, which is passed down through the Ryugu family line, thus making her one of the most important characters in the entire series. But following these events, the new Fishman Pirates and Vanderdecken are captured and begin to suffer the side effects of the energy steroids, which rapidly ages them as they all rot away in prison. However, Luffy ended up sustaining incredibly serious injuries, and as twisted fate would have it, he ends up needing a blood transfusion, which is a big taboo in Fishman society due to the whole Fisher Tiger situation. However, Jinbei swiftly volunteers his own blood to the human pirate, putting their bond on full display for all to see. And as Luffy recovers, he asks Jinbei to join his crew. And Jinbei says yes, but also no. He basically states that yes, he would like to, but he has unfinished business to take care of first. Which is fine, I guess. I'm sure he'll be along swiftly, right? Right? In any case, the peril of Fishman Island isn't over quite yet, because two representatives from the Big Mom Pirates make their presence known on the island, being Pecoms and Baron Tamago. And this is because following the death of Whitebeard, Charlotte Lin Lin, aka Big Mom, offered protection to the island, protection in quotation marks there, under the condition that they produce consistent candy for her. And rather unfortunately, this candy production effort was hindered by the events that had just taken place. And so Luffy takes responsibility for this, claiming that he ate all of the candy and that he would enter the New World in order to defeat Big Mom and claim Fishman Island for himself. And just for good measure, he also said that he would become the Pirate King. So, you know, just casually declaring war against one of the 4 Emperors of the Sea right there. But to be fair, Luffy's efforts were successful, as Big Mom decided to spare Fishman Island and instead target her full rage towards the Straw Hat captain. But for now, everything is fine, and the Straw Hats say goodbye to their new and old acquaintances, with the crew promising to one day take Princess Shirahoshi to the surface. And then they set sail in order to enter the final sea, the New World. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically, sagas in minutes. The series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today, we are heading into the new world at last to examine the mammoth piece of story that is the Dressrosa saga. The Dressrosa saga is the 8th in the series, consisting of 2 arcs but an absolutely mega 148 manga chapters, which makes it the longest saga that we have covered to date, and as such, I'm telling you right here and now, this is certainly not going to be finished within a single video. But to kick things off, we are finally here as we pick up with the Straw Hats emerging into the new world, and immediately they are met with some of the most chaotic and apocalyptic weather conditions that we have ever faced in the series, signifying that this stretch of water is on a completely different level. From here, our new world log pose presents 3 possible destinations to the crew, of which Luffy chooses none of them because they also receive a distress call from a location known as Punk Hazard, and smelling a decent mystery, Luffy becomes determined to visit this island. The Straw Hats are not the only one to receive this signal, however, as this transmission is intercepted by now Vice Admiral Smoker and his G5 Marine forces, who were lying in wait for Luffy at the island that they suspected he was most likely to choose. But as a result, they also set sail for Punk Hazard. After arriving on the island, the crew splits into 2 groups, with the initial landing party being Luffy, Robin, Zoro, and Usopp, who traverse this fiery hellscape and almost immediately stumble upon a dragon, which is quickly defeated. In the meantime, the remaining Straw Hats aboard the Thousand Sunny are captured and imprisoned in a mysterious facility on the other half of Punk Hazard, which is also a hellscape but a frozen one. And here we encounter 2 very strange things. The first of which is a group of children who are being experimented on at the facility, and the second is a samurai, or part of a samurai, named Kinemon. And over the course of Punk Hazard, Kinemon's various separated body parts would be collected together to form one unit of solid samurai. Soon enough though, it becomes apparent that Kinemon was rendered in the state by one Trafalgar Law, a member of the Worst Generation, and who post-time skip has now become a warlord of the sea, and who furthermore appears to be working with the cast of antagonists in control of Punk Hazard. And Law's presence on the island is first discovered by Smoker, and the 2 engage in combat, which resulted in Law's victory via removing Smoker's heart with the incredible powers of his Devil Fruit. To make matters worse, Law is then able to switch the bodies of Smoker and Tashigi, resulting in Tashigi's consciousness being placed into Smoker's fleshy vessel, and vice versa. Furthermore, Law also goes on to do this with the secondary group of Straw Hats, and Nami, Sanji, Frankie, and Chopper all undergo a hilarious body swap. And as for who becomes who in this situation, well, Nami was placed into the body of Frankie, resulting in one very pretty cyborg, whereas Frankie went into the body of Chopper, resulting in the abomination that is this thing. Meanwhile, Chopper went to the body of Sanji, giving us one very adorable chef, and finally Sanji was thrown into the body of Nami, which was something of a dream come true for him, although he was threatened by the overwhelming newfound cyborg powers of Nami not to do anything untoward with her body. Which, to be fair, he really didn't, except for when he started smoking, which was kind of a dick move. At this point though, Luffy stumbles upon Law and remembers him being responsible for saving his life during the Marineford arc, not only providing Luffy with an escape vessel from the war, but also treating his wounds. And after some shenaniganry, eventually Law approaches Luffy with a bold proposition, claiming that he has a plan to take down one of the 4 emperors, and he even suggests that he and Luffy form an alliance to do so. And despite his present crew members warning against the danger of a pirate alliance, Luffy almost immediately accepts his proposition, and Law begins to implement his complicated plan, which begins right here on Punk Hazard. And he also gradually undoes all of the crazy body swapping he implemented within the crew. But step 1 of Law's master plan has to do with the ultimate antagonist of Punk Hazard, a man named Caesar Clown, who was responsible for experimenting on the children, as well as the production of various chemical weapons and producing a substance known as SAD, or SAD, which is then used to create artificial devil fruit by Caesar's benefactors, one of which is eventually revealed to be Warlord of the Sea, Don Quixote Doflamingo, who then uses this to do business with an Emperor of the Sea that the Luffy Law Alliance is targeting, who is later revealed to be Kaido. And in order to put a halt to this, an operation is implemented to capture Caesar Clown, which is easier said than done, because another presence arrives on the island in the form of Vice Admiral Virgo, who is a double agent within the Marines and an extreme physical powerhouse. And just on power, it should be noted that Caesar Clown isn't exactly a weak existence himself, as he had consumed a Logia devil type fruit known as the Gasu Gasu no Mi, which allows him to conjure, manipulate, and become gas, which means that he can do all sorts of crazy crap, such as remove all of the oxygen from the air around him, which went on to instantly defeat a whole host of our good guys. Furthermore, at this stage, a faction of the Straw Hats get captured by Caesar Clown, along with Law, Smoker, and Tashigi, and at this point they form a temporary alliance with Smoker and the G5 Marines, after which Law restores their bodies, and all of a sudden we have quite the miniature army here, marching in full force on Punk Hazard. Meanwhile, Caesar is currently in the process of broadcasting his brand new chemical weapon, which threatens to kill everybody on the island, putting a great sense of urgency into this pirate marine alliance. And Caesar's weapon would comprise a complex set of operations operations, whereby he infused some of his own poisonous gas and a Zoan-type devil fruit to create what I would call a big old blob of death, which was named Smiley. However, this was but the tame form of Caesar's weapon, as basically after consuming a tasty candy designed for Smiley that would go on to kill the creature, then that would reveal the true form of the weapon, which was the widespread release of the gas en masse. Interestingly enough though, this also provided us with the very first example of what happens to a devil fruit after its user passes away, which is that the power immediately reincarnates into the nearest appropriate fruit for future use. So very interesting stuff right there. Now, very notably at this point, there are also quite a few parties watching this broadcast who are representatives from power all over the world, and we do recognize certain figures such as Pecoms and Tamago from the Big Mom Pirates, but also Eustace Kid from the Worst Generation. But many of these figures were entirely unknown characters and have been referred to as the Underground Brokers. As part of the ensuing skirmish, Trafalgar Law and Smoker team up to take on Vice Admiral Virgo in an incredibly hard-fought battle. However, the duo eventually overcome him, and Virgo is left in a state of separation thanks to Law's abilities. As this is going on, Luffy is gunning towards Caesar to defeat and capture him, although along the way, he discovers a child by the name of Momonosuke, who appears to have eaten an artificial devil fruit, not created by Caesar though. Instead, it was crafted by the legendary Dr. Vegapunk, and it has the effect of turning Momonosuke into a small eastern dragon, although the young boy is not capable of controlling his abilities very well at this point in the story. The most important thing about Momonosuke though, is that he is a comrade of the puzzle samurai Kinemon, a duo whose mystery on Punk Hazard would be unraveled over the course of many arcs. In any case, Luffy does eventually find and defeat Caesar, with the other allied forces proving victorious in their individual endeavors as well. One other notable conflict is that Zoro and Tashigi teamed up to defeat Monet, the user of a snow-type Logia fruit. Chaos on Punk Hazard has certainly not gone unnoticed though, and Doflamingo is well aware of the trouble that his business is currently facing, choosing first of all to send 2 members of the Don Quixote Pirates, being Buffalo and Baby 5, to ensure order on the island. Although after their failure, as well as with the sudden break in contact with Monet, who in a very complicated manner was accidentally killed by Caesar, Doflamingo decides to make his way to the island himself. After the victory of the allied forces though, a short break/no party occurs, in which Law reveals the next stage of his plan, which is to visit Green Bit, an island territory connected to that of Dressrosa, the island that Doflamingo currently rules as a king. And after discovering that Law and the Straw Hats are headed to Dressrosa, Kinemon expresses his desire to visit the island as well, because he has mysterious business there, and so Kinemon and Momonosuke join the fun, and the alliance sails away from Punk Hazard with Caesar Clown in chains. This leaves Smoker and the G5 Marines on the island, who are shortly after confronted by the arrival of Doflamingo, who attempts to kill Smoker, but is ultimately stopped by the very well-timed arrival of another figure, being former Marine Admiral Aokiji, who now is just known by his real name Kuzan. In any case, not wanting to face off against Kuzan, Doflamingo smugly retreats back to his kingdom, while Kuzan and Smoker then have a little chat. Now at this point, it should be stated that Kuzan has resigned from the Marines after battling Sakazuki for the position of Fleet Admiral, a 10-day affair that actually took place on Punk Hazard and is the reason why the entire island's climate has been irrevocably morphed into a half-fire, half-ice Pokeball-style island. And so at the moment, Kuzan is acting as more of a rogue agent of justice, although there are allegedly some terrible rumors surrounding his actions and current associates. More delicious mystery, but Kuzan still retains an incredible degree of trust in Smoker, and even requests that Smoker does not report his presence to the Marines at large. And now en route to Dressrosa with the leverage of Caesar Clown, Law calls Doflamingo and issues him with an ultimatum, in that he will hand Caesar over in exchange for Doflamingo resigning his position as a warlord of the sea, which Doflamingo does agree to, and a hostage exchange is arranged on the territory of Green Bit. This opportunity is also taken to introduce us to the current makeup of the 7 warlords of the sea, which does include some familiar faces, being Drakeul Mihawk, Boa Hancock, Bartholomew Kuma, and Doflamingo of course. And in addition to this, there are 2 new warlords mentioned, being Trafalgar Law and Buggy the Clown, who was invited to the organization after his actions during Marineford. But there is one 7th final member who we are keeping a mystery for now, so many mysteries happening here. But furthermore, elsewhere in the world, it is announced that not only have Luffy and Law formed an alliance, but another cohort of the Worst Generation have done the exact same, being Eustace Kid, Scratch Manapoo, and Basil Hawkins. And I guess by default you can also include Massacre Soldier Killer in this alliance, because he is a direct subordinate of Kid. And this alliance was also created with the intention of bringing down one of the 4 emperors, although that emperor is unknown at this point in the story. But despite the seemingly amicable agreement between Doflamingo and Law, both parties are planning all sorts of fun betrayal, as Law charges a section of the Straw Hats with finding and destroying the Smile Factory on Dressrosa, whilst he exchanges Caesar Clown on Green Bit. And in the meantime, Doflamingo also has roughly a billion tricks up his sleeve, including invoking his influence on the world government to have a brand new Marine Admiral sent to the island in order to assist him. And in addition to that, Doflamingo also has a plan to lure Luffy into a trap, as he has organized a tournament in the Corridor Coliseum, with the ultimate prize being the Mera Mera no Mi, a devil fruit once owned by Luffy's now passed brother, Portgas D. Ace. And with that, the stage is now set for one of the most complex and chaotic events to ever take place in the series, as the crew land on the island of Love, passion and toys, Dressrosa. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece and more specifically Sagas in Minutes, the series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today it's time we continue one of the most ambitious sagas ever constructed, that is Dressrosa. The Dressrosa saga is the 8th in the series, consisting of 2 arcs but an absolutely mega 148 chapters, which does make it the longest saga we have covered to date, and hence why we need this whole part 2 business, because we have a lot to cover here today. Where we last left off, the Straw Hat / Trafalgar Law Alliance had been split into 3 groups, one of which was tasked with infiltrating Dressrosa to destroy the Smile Factory led by Luffy, whilst another headed to Green Bit to exchange Caesar Clown as a hostage, led by Law, and a faction to protect the Thousand Sunny, led by no one in particular but we'll say Nami, because she usually ends up being in charge. So a couple of things here. With Luffy's group, they almost immediately encounter a Marine Admiral, although they don't know it, as he is currently passing himself off as a run-of-the-mill blind gambler, although things do get somewhat serious, when Luffy informs him that he is being cheated and he buries the game masters in an awfully deep hole. In any case, this man is later revealed to be Marine Admiral Fujitora, who wields a particularly powerful paramecia fruit known as the Zushi no Mi, which allows him to control gravity to varying degrees. Following this, Luffy discovers that there is a tournament being conducted nearby in the corridor Coliseum, the prize of which is the Mera no Mi, a devil fruit once used by his brother. And so Luffy takes Doflamingo's bait and enters the tournament under the brilliant alias of Lucy. And here Lucy meets a whole cast of characters who would go on to become wildly important during this arc, one of which we will specifically zero in on being Cavendish, a pirate who holds a supreme hatred for every member of the worst generation and who is hell-bent on killing them, which yes, does include Luffy at this stage. And another one of note would be Bartolomeo, who is the exact opposite, as he worships Luffy and the Straw Hats like a deranged fanboy. A lovable deranged fanboy though. We were also introduced to a figure named Ricky, who is not touted to be anything important, but who would turn out to be King Riku Doldo III, the former king of Dressrosa, who a decade ago had his island commandeered by the current king Doflamingo, who used his string devil fruit abilities to force Riku to slaughter his own people and to sway public opinion away from the Riku family, to say the least, allowing Doflamingo to take control of the island. And I would also be remiss not to single out Rebecca, a fairly at this point mysterious gladiator who is fighting to win the Mera no Mi in order to use it to kill Doflamingo. Oh, and rather interestingly, Dressrosa also sees the return of Bellamy, the opponent who Luffy one-shot back in the Skypiea saga, who still works for Doflamingo, but who has matured beyond all belief, and who now holds a huge degree of respect for Luffy. And the tournament breaks down as follows. Essentially, all of the fighters are grouped into 4 blocks, A, B, C, and D. The members of these blocks are then all thrown into the arena at the same time, and a battle royale is conducted until only one fighter remains standing. And getting into things, the winner of Block A would be, rather surprisingly, Jesus Burgess, member of the Blackbeard Pirates, who was masquerading as a character named Happy Store. But the fact that the Blackbeard Pirates have any presence on Dressrosa whatsoever imbues this arc with a whole new layer of sinister feelings, and Luffy even briefly spoke to Blackbeard via Den Mushi and declared that he would not allow them to take Ace's devil fruit. Moving to Block B, and this was quite a chaotic affair, featuring a newly almost heroic Bellamy and a man whose punch was rumored to be able to take down one of the 4 emperors. Neither one of them would win though, as in the end the ultimate troll Bartolomeo proved victorious due to his Bari no Mi abilities, despite stopping mid-combat to take a piss. To the main event, we now look to Block C, which came down to a fierce battle between Monkey D. Luffy and Don Chinjao, a veteran pirate who held a grudge against Luffy's grandfather Garp, although not only was Luffy able to defeat him, but he also incidentally fixed Chinjao's head, causing the veteran pirate to pledge his loyalty to Luffy, which will become a common feature during the saga. And as for Block D, the eventual winner would be Rebecca, after Cavendish revealed his split personality Hakuba, who proceeded to wreck every other contestant bar Rebecca and then promptly fell asleep, resulting in one final battle royale consisting of Jesus Burgess, Bartolomeo, Lucy, Rebecca, and the champion of the Coliseum, Diamante, who was one of Doflamingo's most trusted officers. However, Luffy would not actually fight in this match, as prior to its commencement, he received the shock of a lifetime when Sabo, a childhood brother of Luffy thought to be long dead, revealed himself and requested permission to consume Ace's devil fruit, which Luffy gave gladly, and just in time to exit the Coliseum and begin to deal with the true meat of Dressrosa. Because while these events were occurring, there was no shortage of shenaniganry elsewhere, as Sanji had found himself in a precarious position with Viola, a member of the Don Quixote Pirates, who fooled him with her feminine wiles. But of course, it is later revealed that Viola is a princess of the former monarchy, the Riku family, and despite her villainous actions thus far, was all for bringing down Doflamingo. And so Viola would also go on to inform Sanji that his crew was in imminent danger. At the same time, Frankie was exploring the island and ended up making friends with a toy soldier, who would reveal a seedy underbelly of Dressrosa, as it turned out that there was a member of Doflamingo's crew named Sugar, who had the ability to turn living beings into toys, as well as to go on to enslave save them. And this toy soldier himself had been a victim of sugar, and while he was human, he was named Kuros, formerly known as the Invincible Gladiator, as well as the commander of the Riku Royal Army, and perhaps most importantly of all, the father of Coliseum gladiator Rebecca. Meanwhile, the Sunny Protection team were being assaulted by a member of the Don Quixote pirates named Jorah, who turned everyone into splendid modern art, but was promptly defeated by the very quick thinking of an underrated Straw Hat member by the name of Brooke. And things had not gone to plan for the Caesar Exchange team either on Green Bit, as by this time both Robin and Usopp had been captured/stumbled into the territory of the Tontada tribe, a group of very gullible dwarves who, as with many factions in and around Dressrosa, were planning to mount an assault on the current king Doflamingo. And in their case, this was because he had enslaved a huge portion of their tribe for the purposes of creating artificial devil fruits in the Smile Factory. But here Usopp did what Usopp does best, and he ended up lying about being some legendary hero, and he became known by the Tontada tribe as Usoland, and was subsequently charged with leading their assault on Doflamingo. That's alright though, I'm sure Usopp can handle it. Although if he can't, then luckily the Tontada tribe would eventually liaise with the toy soldier as well as Frankie in order to discuss their impending assault. Also on Green Bit, Law's plan to exchange Caesar had rapidly gone downhill as he found himself in a 2-on-1 battle against not only Doflamingo, but also Marine Admiral Fujitora. And it's safe to say that Law was not expecting to deal with an admiral due to the fact that part of his bargain was to have Doflamingo resign from the Seven Warlords and thus cut all ties with the world government. Unfortunately for Law, this turned out to be but a clever ruse by Doflamingo, who had used his mysterious leverage over the world government to publish his resignation and then have it revoked, with the people of Dressrosa being informed of this by CP0, the strongest cell of Cypherpol agents who work directly for the world nobles. And in the case of Fujitora, well, he was sent specifically to deal with Trafalgar Law as well as Monkey D. Luffy. But in a last-ditch effort, Law was able to make sure that Doflamingo did not reclaim Caesar, with him ending up back on the Thousand Sunny, along with Sanji, who briefly took on Doflamingo directly. However, in this dire situation, the decision was made to have the Sunny Protection team, now including Sanji, immediately move on to the next island of Zo. However, this was much easier said than done, because at this very moment, the flagship of the Big Mom pirates, the Queen Mama Chanta, appeared, who in addition to being incredibly hostile to the Straw Hats, also had a vested interest in capturing Caesar Clown. It really is kind of amazing the efforts that all of these individuals will go to in order to secure a single clown boy. But faced with a faction of the Four Emperors, Sanji made the simple request to Luffy over a Denden Mushi, which was permission to strike back, which Luffy instantly gave because, well, he had already declared war on Big Mom back on Fishman Island. Now, as for everyone else on the island, which at this stage consisted of Luffy, Zoro, Robin, Frankie, Usopp, Law, and Kinemon, who we haven't spoken about much yet, but he's also there. In any case, this group would make the decision to remain on Dressrosa to complete their mission of destroying the Smile Factory, and more importantly, to defeat Doflamingo. And once again, this was much easier said than done, especially when Zoro and Kinemon were confronted directly by both Doflamingo and Fujitora, the latter proving to briefly overwhelm Zoro with his gravity-related abilities. As such, Zoro and Kinemon made a hasty retreat, as Fujitora and Doflamingo made their way to the country's palace with a gravely wounded Trafalgar Law in tow. Upon reaching the palace though, Fujitora made it very clear that his actions on the island were only being conducted as a result of his direct orders, and he warned Doflamingo not to consider him an ally. Fujitora then stated that his ultimate ambition was to make sure that the Seven Warlord system would be abolished by the world government, which of course included Doflamingo's status. And having said all of this to a very volatile madman, this led to a violent clash between Fujitora and Doflamingo, but the action did not proceed from there. In any case, our group of protagonists all had one clear mission now, with Luffy, Zoro, and Kinemon gunning straight towards the palace to deal with Doflamingo, whilst Frankie was to act as a rather loud diversion for the Don Quixote pirates, whilst Usopp, Robin, and a host of the Tontada tribe members infiltrated Dressrosa's underground port with the goal of bringing down Sugar. As with her devil fruit powers, the allied forces would stand no chance in this mission. And just on Sugar for a bit, her abilities were put to predictably sinister use in regards to the Corridor Coliseum, as every fighter wounded and admitted to medical treatment was subsequently turned into a toy by Sugar and then put to work as slaves in the underground port. And so when Usopp and Robin marched in with, no joke, the fate of the entire island on their shoulders, not only were they unfortunately met by Sugar, but also Treble, another one of Doflamingo's most trusted officers, and this duo succeeded in defeating everyone except for Usopp, who was forced to admit the reality that he was no legendary hero. However, instead he made a new claim that from today onwards, he would become the Tontada tribe's legendary hero, proceeding to take on both Sugar and Treble heroically and promptly losing. However, in one of the most incredible twists of fate in the entire series, Sugar would end up feeding Usopp the weapon designed to bring her down. which resulted in what can only be described as this face, which terrified Sugar and knocked her out. And at this very moment, the tide of the Dressrosa saga rapidly shifted, as every single being that had been turned into a toy, be they a citizen of the country or a Coliseum fighter, was reverted back to their original form. And they were pretty pissed off, to say the least, as they decided that the Straw Hat Pirates had been their saviors and en masse marched on Doflamingo, which would be the catalyst for one of the largest and most chaotic battles that we have ever seen in the series. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and more specifically sagas in minutes, the series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today, it is time to finally conclude the mighty endeavor that is the Dressrosa saga. The Dressrosa saga, as stated multiple times now, is the 8th in the series, consisting of 2 arcs but an absolutely mega 148 chapters, which contains a ridiculously jam-packed story with a massive cast of characters that we will be attempting to wrap up here today. And last time we ended with the defeat of Sugar, an officer of the Don Quixote Pirates, whose dismissal resulted in everyone who had been turned into a toy regaining their original forms and focusing their rage on one man, the current king of the island, Don Quixote Doflamingo. And the first shot in this endeavor would be taken by Kuros, our former toy soldier, who upon regaining his human body, leapt into action and decapitated Doflamingo, thus ending the entire saga. And actually no, it turned out to be a string clone, because that's just a thing that Doflamingo can do with his devil fruit, which is insane. First of many insane things actually, because sensing this unprecedented danger to his position, Doflamingo chose to activate a technique known as the Birdcage, whereby he entrapped the entire island in a cage of razor-sharp strings, which would slowly encroach on the land, threatening to kill everyone caught within it. And with that, we are now on a clock to defeat the Warlord of the Sea. But that would be further complicated by the fact that Doflamingo decided to broadcast a bounty system in order to hinder the uprising on Dressrosa, assigning various figures a star rating, with each star being worth 100 million berries to anyone who was able to capture the individual in question. So with this in mind, both Luffy and Law, who was now freed from the grasp of Doflamingo, were worth 3 stars each. But rather surprisingly, the most valuable figure would turn out to be God Usopp, whom Doflamingo assumed a mighty 5 stars due to him being the reason why all of the toys reverted. So this hinders effort somewhat, as the full force of the Don Quixote Pirates, as well as many civilians of Dressrosa and some miscellaneous bounty hunters, now set their sights on the prize in front of them. Oh, and I should also say that he offered a 3-star rating to Sabo, who after competing in the finals of the Corridor Coliseum was successfully able to acquire the Nami. But in addition to this, it is also revealed that Sabo is a high-ranking member of the Revolutionary Army and is here to investigate Doflamingo's black market practices. And shortly after, Sabo would come into conflict with Admiral Fujitora, which prevented the Marine from hunting down Luffy and Law. And with his new abilities, Sabo was also able to fight Fujitora into an effective stalemate, at which point Fujitora had a change of heart and decided to bet on Doflamingo being taken down by Luffy, then turning his attention to saving as many civilians as possible from the indiscriminate wrath of Doflamingo. Now during this time, we take the opportunity to zero in on one Trafalgar Law, the man responsible for bringing Luffy and the Straw Hats into this situation under the guise of defeating one of the 4 emperors. In reality, that was but a clever ruse, and Law's plan never extended this far, and in fact this whole endeavor was crafted in order to use Luffy to help Law exact personal revenge against Doflamingo, because as it turns out, he and Law, well, they have quite a history. As a child, Law, after a horrific childhood in which he was stricken with amber lead syndrome, as well as a genocide conducted upon his homeland, would end up finding his way to a younger incarnation of the Don Quixote Pirates, and specifically developing a relationship with Doflamingo's brother Rocinante. And we also go another layer deep into this flashback, briefly focusing on Doflamingo and how he was once a world noble until his father took his family to live with the masses, which was a predictably tragic move, and one day a child Doflamingo felt so bitter that he murdered his own father. Now his brother Rocinante would take a different path by becoming an agent of the Marines and then going on to infiltrate the Don Quixote Pirates on their behalf. But everything would change one day when Rocinante overheard Law's real name, which was Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, and knowing that there would be no mercy whatsoever if Doflamingo were to discover this name, Rocinante fled the crew with Law in hand and traveled far and wide to find a doctor who could cure Law's affliction, all to no avail though, until an opportunity to source a certain devil fruit came up, being the Ope Ope no Mi. Now Doflamingo was on the hunt for this fruit because it was fabled to allow its user to make others somewhat immortal, or not immortal but more accurately perpetually youthful, which was something that very much interested Mr. Flamingo. And in a series of more tragic events, Rocinante's identity as a Marine would be uncovered, and Doflamingo would go on to murder him with the exact same gun that he had used on their father. However, this was not before Rocinante acquired the Ope Ope Nami and fed it to Law, which allowed him to cure his Amber Lead syndrome and grow up into the figure that he is today, hell-bent on destroying Doflamingo for what he did to Rocinante. So back to the modern day now, and the current developments are not going in Doflamingo's favor, as his crew were being systematically dismantled by the small army marching upon him. Several key Coliseum fighters were able to take down prominent officers, and Straw Hat member Frankie rounded this out by defeating Senor Pink in what can only be described as a true battle between manly men things. At this point, this left only Doflamingo and his top officers remaining, the first of which to go down would be Diamante, who was defeated by Kuros in an act of retribution, as Diamante was responsible for murdering Kuros' wife and Rebecca's mother Scarlet. Also, Scarlet was the daughter of former King Riku, thus making Rebecca royalty of the Riku dynasty. Next up, Pika would be dismantled, quite literally, by the efforts of Straw Hat swordsman Zoro, who chopped and chopped and chopped until Pika was forced to face off against Zoro directly, which definitely did not work in his favor at all. And finally, Treble would come to kind of defeat himself actually, after a poorly thought out explosion technique designed to kill Law, but it pretty much just ended up knocking Treble out himself. During this time, we also had a brief rematch of Luffy versus Bellamy, which ended in just as one-sided a result as it did the first time around, except this time it was much more heartfelt, because Bellamy had resigned himself to having pledged his loyalty to Doflamingo, but was also more than happy to be brought down by the only other man in the world that he respected, being Luffy. Now, despite putting up a grand effort against Doflamingo, including severely damaging his internal organs, Trafalgar Law, still fairly gravely injured himself mind you, would be taken out of action, leaving only two combatants on this dramatic stage, being Luffy and Doflamingo. Now, that isn't to say that everyone else was just standing about doing nothing, because after repelling Senor Pink, Frankie and the Tontata forces finally reached the Smile Factory, where they freed the enslaved tribe, including Princess Mancherry. In the ensuing chaos, Kinemon also very notably found the samurai he was hunting for on the island, being Kanjuro, another nice piece in the samurai mystery puzzle that would not be answered in the saga. However, both Kinemon and Kanjuro would go on to contribute to the defense of Dressrosa by attempting to stop the Birdcage from encroaching further alongside Zoro. And this effort would be joined from all sides by various factions, one of which would be the Coliseum fighters, who all pushed back against the Birdcage thanks to a large barrier created by Bartolomeo. And Frankie and his faction were also able to use the Seastone Smile Factory as a barrier for them to attempt to stop the Birdcage. And finally, Marine Admiral Fujitora would even join this effort, with the combination of everyone managing to halt the cage very briefly, but very importantly. Cutting back to the main action, Luffy would now reveal a new form to take on Doflamingo, being Gear 4th Bound Man, a transformation that outclassed Doflamingo in both speed and power, although it was unable to deliver the final blow before Luffy ran out of time and was forced to accept the assistance of the civilians of Dressrosa to buy him enough time to regain his use of Haki to use the form once more. In addition to this, Sabo also hopped into action once more in order to prevent Jesus Burgess of the Blackbeard Pirates from killing Luffy, a fight that Sabo would go on to convincingly win. But here we are now, cutting it very, very close to everyone's demise at this point. However, Luffy, thanks to the efforts of almost literally everyone on the island, was given just enough time to invoke Gear 4th once more and finally defeat Doflamingo with an incredible King Kong gun, shattering both the glasses and the global standing of the warlord, dispelling the Birdcage and saving the entire kingdom. Following this, Admiral Fujitora would issue a formal apology to King Riku, who was reinstated as the monarch of the nation, along with Viola and Rebecca regaining their place as royalty. And at this time, Sabo's investigation on behalf of the Revolutionary Army would conclude, and after making a Vivia card for Luffy, he left along with his forces. Now, elsewhere in the world, big things were happening, specifically in regards to the other alliance comprised of Worst Generation members, who had found themselves all of a sudden under attack by a profound world figure. This man, nay this creature, had found their base by jumping off a sky island and landing 10,000 meters onto the hard ground, and after emerging with nothing but a light headache, he was introduced as 100 Beast Kaido, one of the 4 emperors and a being known as the strongest creature alive, which sent our very unfortunate Worst Generation members into a slight panic to say the least. Now also by this time, the Sanji-led faction of the Straw Hats had made it safely to Zou, although Zou itself was proving to be less than safe, with a contingent of the Beast Pirates, Kaido's crew, they're allegedly searching for a certain samurai. There's that word again, samurai. The search was not going well though, as they went on to be dispatched by Sanji and Brooke. Back to Dressrosa now, and Luffy and the crew would be forced to flee soon enough, although when doing so he was faced with a rather large blockade in the form of Fujitora, whom Luffy engaged in combat with, only to be interrupted by the citizens of Dressrosa, who under the guise of shouting angrily at Luffy, actually strategically positioned themselves on the battlefield, preventing Fujitora from invoking his gravity powers. And Fujitora then had no choice but to acquiesce, developing quite a liking for Luffy and even regretting the fact that he had blinded himself, as he now had a profound desire to look at Luffy with his own eyes. Now usually the escape from the island is where things might end, but no, because something very fascinating had occurred during Luffy's recovery period, which was that a force of individuals had banded together and pledged their loyalty to Luffy, proposing to become his underlings. And these individuals included Cavendish, captain of the Beautiful Pirates, who after being saved from his toy fate by Usopp, no longer held any ill will towards Luffy, as well as Bartolomeo, our resident fanboy and captain of the Bato Club. In addition to them though, there was Sai, commander of the Harpo Navy, Hideo, who led the newly formed Hideo Pirates, the Tontada Pirates helmed by Leo, a giant that Luffy had actually defeated in the corridor Coliseum named Haradin, who himself was in charge of a small cohort of giants, and finally Orlumbus, who was in command of the Yont Maria Grand Fleet, which sported a crew totaling roughly 4,300 members. And all of these figures had come to decide amongst themselves that they would follow Luffy. To which Luffy swiftly rejected this idea in the name of freedom and, well, just not wanting to do it, which only endeared him further to this band, who went on to form their own association anyway, which is now known as the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Furthermore, even Bellamy became something of an ally, because while he didn't join the Grand Fleet, he did take a piece of Luffy's Vivia card and would go on to retire from piracy, instead becoming an apprentice dyer and using his newly acquired skills to create a Jolly Roger, assumedly for the Grand Fleet. And with that matter settled, the Grand Fleet went their separate ways, with Luffy and the Straw Hats coming aboard Bartolomeo's ship, the Going Luffy Senpai, in order for them to journey to the island of Zoro, to meet up with the other half of their crew, who were currently facing all sorts of issues, but that is a story for the next saga. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece and more specifically Sagas in Minutes, the series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece, and today we are on the verge of catching up with modern events as we step into the latest and what is sure to be the longest saga in the entire series, being the Yonko Saga. The Yonko Saga is the 9th in the series, which currently consists of 4 arcs, one of which is still ongoing at the time of this recording, being Wano. And so I am unable to give you an accurate assessment of chapters and episodes, at this point anyway. However, currently it is startlingly approaching the 200 chapter mark, so we are quite possibly looking at the longest and most earth-shaking saga in the series thus far. And diving into things immediately following the events of Dressrosa, one faction of the Straw Hats are ferried to the island of Zoro to meet up with the rest of their crew, only to discover that the quote-unquote island is actually a gigantic elephant that houses an entire civilization on top of it. And after scaling the elephant, the Straw Hats are met with one of the most beautiful landscapes ever featured in the series, as well as swiftly encounter the Mink tribe, a species of humanoid mammals who are native to Zoro. And after a somewhat shaky start, it is revealed that the Straw Hats are considered something of a heroic presence by the Minks, which has to do with the actions of the other half of their crew, who during the events of Dressrosa had arrived on the island led by Sanji, only to discover Zoro and its citizens on the verge of death following a grand battle. Now this is because very recently a man by the name of Jack, a key member of the Beast Pirates who are captained by none other than Emperor of the Sea Kaido, who, just a sidebar for a second, you may remember as the man who Luffy and Law initially formed an alliance to take down. In any case, Jack was charged with hunting down a ninja from the land of Wano by the name of Raizo. Now Raizo is a comrade of Kinemon, Momonosuke and Kanjuro, an assortment of very strange individuals that we have been collecting over the last few arcs, with their ultimate purpose to become clear shortly. However, the Minks vehemently denied that Raizo was on the island, and a battle lasting 5 days and nights would commence, with Jack and his forces engaging in brutal combat with the Mink tribe, led by Duke Inuarashi during the day and Master Nekomamushi at night. But after 5 days, both sides found themselves within a stalemate, and so Jack resorted to using a chemical weapon, which interestingly enough was actually developed by Caesar Clown, and it pretty much instantaneously resulted in the resounding defeat of the Mink tribe. But before he could cause too much damage, Jack received word that Don Quixote Doflamingo had been defeated on Dressrosa by Monkey D. Luffy, and that was important to say the least, because Doflamingo was responsible for trafficking weapons and artificial devil fruits, and so Jack set off to reclaim Doflamingo from the Marines, at which point he was met in battle by now Inspector General Sengoku, Admiral Fujitora, and Vice Admiral Suru, which resulted in Jack's reported death. Spoilers though, he did not die. And so the Sanji faction of the Straw Hats arrived after this, and given that they just so happened to have Caesar Clown with them as a prisoner, they forced him to develop a cure for his own chemical weapon, and thus saved the entirety of the Mink tribe. Our problems most certainly do not end there though, because with the exit of one Emperor of the Sea, another came to take their place, with Pacoms and Capone Gangbej arriving on the island in the name of Big Mom. And this team was charged with the task of abducting Sanji of all people, which was quite the surprise, with the plan being to forcibly have him marry one of Big Mom's daughters known as Charlotte Pudding. Now this is because Sanji has a ton of history that we were not aware of up until now, and is in fact a former prince of the Germa Kingdom led by his father Vinsmoke Judge, who often offered Sanji up to form an alliance with the Big Mom pirates. More on that later though. And while we're here, Beige also took Caesar as well, because unfortunately for this clown, Big Mom just so happens to have business with him as well. Oh, and finally, Beige also ended up betraying Pacoms by shooting him in the back, because Beige is very sneaky and he has some plans of his own to implement. Pacoms would of course recover on Zo, which was his home island, as he himself is a mink, and the Straw Hats would eventually come to be reunited, sans Sanji. Now after Kinemon and Kanjuro eventually made it up the elephant because they encountered how shall we put this, a series of misfortunes, the Mink tribe then revealed that Raizo is indeed on the island and that he is safe, meaning that each and every one of them endured harsh torture and potential death just to keep this ninja hidden. And when we are taken to see Raizo, not only do we encounter the strangest Wano citizen yet, but also a very funky red poneglyph known as a road poneglyph, one of only 4 in the world, which when combined will reveal the location of the legendary island Rough Tell. At this point, we also finally get to understand why we've been collecting these weird Wano people, because their country had been taken over by Kaido, and they are searching for allies to help them bring him down, which Luffy does eventually agree to do, along with Trafalgar Law and the Mink tribe. And as such, the Ninja Pirate Mink Samurai Alliance was born. But immediately after this, alive and well, Jack would attempt to return to Zo, only to be promptly struck down by the trunk of Zunisha in one of the most glorious pieces of action within One Piece. But we aren't headed to Wano just yet, because we still have a little bit of a Sanji problem to solve, which sees Luffy, Nami, Brooke and Chopper deciding to embark into the territory of Big Mom in order to reclaim him. And on this trip they are also going to be taking Pacoms, a member of the Big Mom pirates, to guide them, which also results in a mink by the name of Pedro coming along in order to keep Pacoms in line. Oh, and very sneakily, another mink named Carrot snuck aboard the Thousand Sunny and only made her presence known after they had departed. And so the Sanji retrieval team said their goodbyes to the Dressrosa Straw Hat faction, and they promised to meet up again on Wano to implement their plan to take down Kaido, which leads us into the next arc. On their way to Whole Cake Island, the home territory of Big Mom, situated within the greater empire of Totoland, our retrieval team encounter a ship transporting 2 members of the Vinsmoke family, being Vinsmoke Yonji and Vinsmoke Reiju, Sanji's younger brother and older sister respectively. Reiju then uses her abilities to save Luffy's life after he poisoned himself with his own cooking because Luffy, and Yonji very predictably fell immediately in love with Nami, and the 2 vessels then parted ways. The Thousand Sunny does then go on to enter Totoland, disembarking firstly on Cacao Island, where they actually meet the girl in question, Charlotte Pudding, the woman whom Sanji is forcibly betrothed to. And she seems like quite a nice lady, to be honest, even going so far as to give the Straw Hats a super special secret route to take into Whole Cake Island, which they do end up using, although it lands them squarely in the territory of the Seducing Woods, where the team are assailed by Charlotte Brûlé and Charlotte Cracker. And this is where things would split, with Chopper and Carrot being caught in Brûlé's mirror world, Pacoms having been captured earlier by Capone Gang Beige, while Brooke and Pedro went off in search of Big Mom's road poneglyph, leaving only Luffy and Nami to face off directly against Cracker, one of Big Mom's sweet commanders, and thus one of the most powerful combatants of the entire crew. However, the combination of Luffy and Nami would prove superior to this, and after 11 hours of fighting, Cracker was defeated, which prompted the Big Mom pirates to muster a supreme force to march on Luffy. In the meantime, Sanji was having something of a family reunion, which was rapidly becoming violent when he engaged in combat with 2 of his brothers and his father. And here we also begin to learn more about Sanji's history, as the rest of his siblings are genetically modified superhumans, with Sanji being the only child who was born quote-unquote normal due to the self-sacrificial actions of his late mother Sora. This disappointed Judge greatly, who would eventually imprison and even fake the death of Sanji, and one day allow him to be free in Ace Blue on the condition that he would never ever reveal his lineage. Not that Sanji would even want to. And this time period also properly introduced us to Charlotte Lin Lin, aka Big Mom, who was quickly portrayed as quite possibly the strongest human on the planet, with a bit of a tendency for hunger pangs that on one occasion was quelled by Jinbei, who was on the island to sever his allegiance with the Big Mom pirates in order to properly accept Luffy's invitation to join the Straw Hats. Now, Luffy and Nami, after their vicious battle with Cracker, would then encounter Sanji with his family. However, the chef refused to return to the crew as he was still being blackmailed with Zeph's life, even going so far as to escalate this matter to a full-on fight with Luffy. And in a particularly heartbreaking scene, a very tired Luffy was defeated. Although Luffy being Luffy, he then made a very stubborn decision and boldly declared that he would not eat anything until Sanji returned to the crew. After which Luffy and Nami were assailed by a small army led by Charlotte Montour, who captured and imprisoned them in Whole Cake Chateau. Some good news though, as Chopper and Carrot had managed to overpower their captors in the mirror world and forced Brûlé into assisting them, which would prove absolutely integral to the remainder of the arc. More very bad news though, as Brooke, with the assistance of Pedro, had managed to find his way into Big Mom's poneglyph collection, which housed 3 of the stones, including the the much needed road poneglyph. Now under normal circumstances this would be just super. However, Big Mom arrived to put a halt to Brooke's actions, which resulted in Brooke engaging in one-on-one combat with an Emperor of the Sea, and then promptly getting destroyed and becoming captured himself. More good news though, because Luffy and Nami would go on to be freed by Jinbei, a very welcome sight to these two Straw Hats, but stubborn Luffy, being stubborn, decided to head back to the spot where he told Sanji he would wait and not eat, whilst Nami and Jinbei joined Chopper and Carrot in the Mirror World, where they ultimately freed Brooke thanks to using Brulee's mirror powers to find him. And furthermore, after rejoining the crew, Brooke opened up his usually empty skull and revealed that he had managed to take rubbings of all three poneglyphs, thus submitting Brooke as a supreme candidate for MVP of Whole Cake Island. Cutting back to Sanji now though, things aren't exactly looking up for him, as just as he had accepted his fate of marrying Pudding, he just so happens to discover that she is in fact evil and spearheading a plot to murder Sanji, as well as the rest of the Vinsmoke family, at their own wedding ceremony no less. And the reasoning is so that Big Mom can take control of all of the advanced technology of the Germa Kingdom, which is questionable because how would she know how to use any of it, but whatever, it's fine. And even though Sanji is still technically under the conditions of blackmail, he then makes the decision to rejoin Luffy, who is waiting for him in the promised spot, and after a tearful reunion, the captain and the chef once again join forces. Now in theory, this is the point where we've actually accomplished everything we came here to do. We have the poneglyph rubbings and we have Sanji. But things aren't quite that simple though, because the life of Zeph is still being threatened, and even though Sanji thoroughly despises his family, he realized that he could not bring himself to abandon them to their fate. And so Luffy suggests that they crash the wedding. And in order to achieve this, Jinbei has something of a cunning plan involving a figure who has popped up a fair bit at this point, being Capone Gang Beige. And in case you've forgotten, Beige is a member of the Worst Generation, just like Luffy and Law, and as it turns out, Beige has his own grand ambitions on Whole Cake Island, and all this time he has been plotting to assassinate Big Mom. So of course Jinbei suggests they go and meet with Beige to form an alliance. And so with 3.5 hours until the wedding ceremony is set to begin, the two factions secretly gather to discuss how they are going to topple Big Mom's entire empire. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece and more specifically sagas in minutes. The series that aims to equip you with the basic knowledge to leap into the wilderness of One Piece. And today we are on the verge of catching up with modern events as we step into what is the latest and what is sure to be the longest saga in the series, being the Yonko Saga. The Yonko Saga is the 9th in the series, which consists of 4 arcs, one of which is sadly incomplete at the time of this recording, and rather unfortunately that means that this is more than likely going to be our final episode of Sagas in Minutes until the Wano arc has reached completion. So that's a bit bittersweet, but the good news is that once you finish this video, then you will be very well equipped to jump into modern One Piece. So let's begin. Where we last left off, the Whole Cake Island faction of the Straw Hats were about to meet with a member of the Worst Generation, being Capone Gang Beige, to discuss the possibility of forming an alliance to take down Big Mom at the tea party scheduled to start in 3 hours. And at this point, a new player enters the fray, a stylish devil by the name of Gangsta Gastino, who is immediately recognized as Caesar Clown in a very poor disguise. And Caesar is here because he's been a naughty boy and embezzled research funds from Big Mom and is now desperately trying to save his own life from the inevitable wrath of an emperor. And while things definitely get off to a bit of a rough start, eventually Luffy, Capone and Caesar settle on working together and the plan to bring down Big Mom begins. Which now takes us to the tea party, during which Sanji was scheduled to be married to Charlotte Pudding, and all sorts of fancy guests arrive, but most importantly, we are introduced to Charlotte Katakuri, who is by far the most powerful member of the Big Mom Pirates apart from Charlotte Linlin herself, and furthermore he is shown to have the absolutely insane ability to peer briefly into the future via observation haki. Now as the guests mingle at the tea party, a curious photo is placed on Big Mom's table containing the image of a woman named Mother Carmel, and she was something of a mentor figure for Big Mom, as when she was 5 years old, Linlin was abandoned on the island of Elbaf, where she was then taken in to Carmel's orphanage. Now crazily enough, even at this age, Linlin was capable of earth-shattering power, as well as her monstrous hunger pangs, which one day culminated in Linlin accidentally killing an elder giant warrior, resulting in the exile of the orphanage from Elbaf. But sadly that would be far from the end of this particular tragedy, as in a state of food-induced euphoria, Linlin would not only eat Mother Carmel, but all of the children in the orphanage. So yeah, that's kind of sad, but one silver lining is that Carmel just so happened to be a child trafficker who sold her orphans, so I guess we'll call it even? And of course Linlin has no memory of this, although as a result of eating Carmel, Linlin would acquire her devil fruit ability, the Soru no Mi. But back to the modern day, this photo formed the crux of the plans for the Allied forces, who were intending intending on smashing it right in front of Big Mom and having her assume a state of uncontrollable rage, during which point she would be vulnerable for an attack, in theory. But how do we get to this point? Well, primarily via cake, as just before Sanji could be assassinated at his own wedding, out popped many Luffys, which sent the ceremony into chaos, during which time Jinbei took the opportunity to officially end his affiliation with the Big Mom Pirates and declared his intent to join the Straw Hats, to which Luffy was absolutely delighted. But all of this madness allowed Brooke the chance to smash the photo of Carmel and resulted in a state of profound rage and despair for Big Mom, just as planned. What was not planned though is that not even this was enough to render Big Mom vulnerable, and the alliance was forced into a swift retreat. During this time, Luffy, being Luffy as usual, insisted on taunting Big Mom further by stating that he was going to defeat Kaido and then return to Whole Cake Island in order to deal with her. And finally, to top everything off, he stated that he would become the Pirate King, and the two briefly clashed, causing an immense shockwave across the entirety of Whole Cake Chateau. Speaking of the chateau though, due to a complex series of events that is more trouble to cover than it's worth, a large explosion would occur, compromising the integrity of the building and causing it to collapse. Although at the last second it was turned into cake by a member of the Big Mom Pirates, thus saving all of their lives. As for the various factions who had made enemies of the Big Mom Pirates, they now went their separate ways, and we were left following the Straw Hats as they raced to the Thousand Sunny with an enraged Big Mom in hot pursuit. The bigger problem facing everyone in the vicinity at the moment though was the destruction of the wedding cake, as Big Mom had now entered a hunger tantrum demanding wedding cake. And as such, this prompted Pudding to ask Sanji for assistance in creating a replacement cake to save the lives of everyone on Totterland, as the original chef had been injured. And Sanji, given his pride and mission as a chef, agreed to do this and thus began a race against time, weighing the destruction of Totterland against the baking of a gigantic delicious cake. Upon reaching the Thousand Sunny, the Straw Hats discovered Charlotte Katakuri laying in wait for them, at which point Luffy forced Katakuri into Brulee's mirror world and very boldly claimed that he would defeat him. But the remaining Straw Hats were far from out of trouble, as the Thousand Sunny was frozen in candy thanks to the abilities of one Charlotte Perospero, which saw Pedro make the ultimate sacrifice and use his life to set the Sunny free, as well as significantly damage Perospero. Rest in peace, you magnificent mink. With the Big Mom Pirates still in pursuit of the Straw Hats, a long drawn out battle would play out between Luffy and Katakuri, in which Katakuri proved superior to the Straw Hat captain in every regard imaginable, even possessing a very similar devil fruit. However, Luffy refused to give up and eventually discovered the secret to Katakuri's power, being Future Sight, and he decided that he would continue to face off against Katakuri until he learned the technique as well, which slowly, very slowly, but surely he did. On Katakuri's side of the battle though, what we would see would be a complete mental breakdown of a being who strived for perfection, being consistently proven that he was not in any way perfect, and gradually being overcome by the flawed existence that was Luffy. Through this change in mentality, Luffy would also come to earn Katakuri's respect, and the two would culminate this fight in one of the most brutal clashes ever showcased in One Piece, by the end of which Katakuri had been completely converted to Luffy's sheer belief in himself, and he saw no reason to fight any further, thus collapsing in defeat. At this stage, Luffy was also in a bit of a precarious position, but luckily Pacoms emerged in a poor disguise to remove him from the mirror world, and he even invoked his Sulong form to allow Luffy to escape properly, assisted by Sanji. At this point, the cake had been well and truly baked and ferried far away by Capone Gang Beige, and actually Big Mom did eventually reach and consume it, thus slating her hunger pangs before launching back into action to assert revenge on those who had invaded her territory. So sadly, things were looking quite dire for the Straw Hats, even with Luffy and Sanji safely aboard the Sunny. However, they did still have allies in the form of the Sun Pirates, being Jinbei's now former crew, as well as a surprise addition of the German Double Six, who had vowed to take revenge on Big Mom for their attempted murder. In addition to this, despite the fact that Jinbei had joined the Straw Hats, he would go on to beg Luffy for permission to remain behind and assist his crew, unable to bear the thought of leaving them to die. Luffy did grant this permission, however he gave Jinbei a very strict order to meet up with them on Wano, and through these combined actions, the Straw Hats were allowed to escape. However, Jinbei, the Sun Pirates, and the Germa were left to an unknown fate as a fully recovered Big Mom arrived to confront them, thus bringing a sudden end to the whole Cake Island arc. Elsewhere in the world though, an event known as the Reverie was taking place, which saw a gathering of various world figures at the Holy Land of Marineford for a 7-day conference in order to discuss the future of the world. During this time, many familiar figures made a return to the story, including Princess Shirahoshi and the Ryugu family from Fishman Island, Princess Vivi and King Cobra from the Desert Nation of Alabasta, as well as the Riku family from Dressrosa, and so many more, far too many to cover here. However, being in Marineford, they were subject to the presence of the world nobles, and one in particular, being St. Charles, attempted to abduct abduct Princess Shirahoshi, only to be stopped by another world noble named Saint Mosgard, who very notably was the same man whom Shirahoshi's mother Queen Otohime had saved on Fishman Island that one time. During this time, we were also enlightened to the actions of the Revolutionary Army, who were using the Reverie as a chance to conduct a coordinated strike. As such, their captains were in the process of assembling as we were introduced to them saving a town of civilians from a man acting under the banner of the Blackbeard pirates. These captains were all, let's say, interesting figures, very much larger than life, one quite literally, and each with their own incredibly bizarre quirks. However, they were undeniably powerful and wrapped up this situation in an instant, even managing to inspire the people of the town to find their inner strength and fight for themselves. It is then made clear that the Revolutionary Army are planning on launching an attack on Marijois in order to reclaim their former comrade Bartholomew Kuma, who at this stage has been converted into a cyborg and is being rented out as a glorified vehicle for the world nobles. In addition to them, another curious face emerges on Marijois, being member of the worst generation Jewelry Bonnie, who sees Kuma in this state and claims that the world nobles will pay for what they have done, hinting at a direct connection between Bonnie and what was once the ruler of the Sorbet Kingdom, Bartholomew Kuma. Aboard the Thousand Sunny, we now have some big news to say the least, as the events of Whole Cake Island had sent waves throughout the world, and with the latest exploit of Straw Hat Luffy, he was issued a bounty of 1.5 billion berries and labeled as the 5th Emperor of the Sea. However, there were even more earth-shattering events in the works, as Big Mom was still on a quest to take revenge on Luffy, and thanks to Luffy's ever so big mouth, she knew exactly where he was heading next, the island of Wano, home territory of another Emperor of the Sea, Kaido. And in doing so, Big Mom gave Kaido something of a courtesy call, letting him know that Luffy's head belonged to her, and even suggested that they get along like old times. How very intriguing. Back on Marijois, we are then introduced to a very mysterious figure holding Luffy's newly printed bounty poster, as they descend into an icy storage area to discover a giant straw hat, which looks to be an exact replica of the one currently worn by Luffy, handed down to him from Shanks, who inherited it from Roger. Except that this straw hat is absolutely massive, although whoever this shadowy dude is, he most certainly has picked up on the connection at play here. Elsewhere, the Gorosei have gathered for a particularly important meeting, requested by a most unlikely figure who we did just mention, being the Emperor of the Sea and a previous owner of Luffy's straw hat, Red-Haired Shanks, who had approached the Gorosei directly in order to discuss a particular pirate. And during this time, we are also introduced to an object named the Empty Throne, a symbolic existence that serves as a statement that all kings of this world stand on equal footing. This, of course, is a complete facade, as we come to see the shadowy figure previously showcased emerge and take his place sitting upon this throne, effectively denoting him as the ruler of this world, whose name is Im, by the way. Not only that, but the Gorosei have gathered and they all bow before him, asking which light Im would like extinguished from history. And amongst these candidates are Straw Hat Luffy, Princess Shirahoshi, Marshal D-Teach, but most alarmingly, the one picture that Im leaves intact being that of Princess Nefertari Vivi. And on that note, we now jump elsewhere in the world to see the Whole Cake Island faction of the Straw Hats arriving on the outskirts of the Wano territory. And as they proceed to the island, they get caught up in a whirlpool, separating each and every one of them, leaving Luffy to wake up on the shores of Wano alone with the Thousand Sunny, ready to begin one of the grandest stories that would ever be told in One Piece. But that pretty much does it for Sagas in Minutes. If you enjoyed the series, then please do let me know in the comments below, and if you're keen for some more One Piece content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular One Piece business delivered straight to your YouTube feed. This has been the Grand Line Review, and I'll see you after the conclusion of Wano.